Say Trollocs and Halfman worse than wildfire. Worse than anything. So do I. Byrne wanted to be done with you. It was Trollocs gave him that mark when he was a yearling. He says game is scarce and you're fatter than any deer he's seen in months. And we should be done with you. But Byrne is always impatient. Why don't you tell me about it? I hope you're not dark friends. I don't like killing people after I've fed them. Just remember, they'll know if you lie. Even Dapple is already near as upset as Byrne. His eyes, as yellow as the wolf's eyes, blinked no more than theirs did. They are wolf's eyes, Eric thought. Egwene was looking at him, he realized, waiting for him to decide what they should do. Light. Suddenly I'm the leader again. They had decided from the first that they could not risk telling the real story to anyone. But he saw no chance for them to get away, even if he managed to get his axe out before... Dapple growled deep in her throat, and the sound was taken up by the other three around the fire, then by the wolves in the darkness. The menacing rumble filled the night. All right, Baron said quickly. All right. The growling cut off, sharp and sudden. Egwene unclenched her hands and nodded. It all started a few days before winter night, Baron began, when our friend Matt saw a man in a black cloak. Elias never changed his expression or the way he lay on his side, but there was something about the tilt of his head that spoke of ears pricking up. The four wolves sat down as Perrin went on. He had the impression they were listening too. The story was a long one, and he told almost all of it. The dream he and the others had had in Bearlawn, though, he kept to himself. He waited for the wolves to make some sign that they had caught the omission, but they only watched. Dapple seemed friendly, Byrne angry. He was hoarse by the time he finished. And if she doesn't find us in Camelin, we'll go on to Tar Valon. We don't have any choice except to get help from the Aes Sedai. Trollocs and Halfman this far south, Elias mused. Now that's something to consider. He rooted behind him and tossed Perrin a hide water bag, not really looking at him. He appeared to be thinking. He waited until Perrin had drunk and replaced the blood before he spoke again. I don't hold with Aes Sedai. The Red Aja, those that like hunting for men who mess with the One Power, they wanted to gentle me once. I told them to their faces they were Black Aja. Serve the Dark One, I said. And they didn't like that at all. They couldn't catch me, though, once I got into the forest. But they did try. Yes, they did. Come to that, I doubt any Aes Sedai would take kindly to me after that. I had to kill a couple of warders. Bad business, that, killing warders. Don't like it. This talking to wolves, Baron said uneasily. It has to do with the power? Of course not, Elias growled. Wouldn't have worked on me, gentling, but it made me mad, them wanting to try. This is an old thing, boy. Older than Aes Sedai. Older than anybody using the One Power. Old as humankind. Old as wolves. They don't like that either, Aes Sedai. Old things coming again. I'm not the only one. There are other things, other folk. Makes Aes Sedai nervous. Makes them mutter about ancient barriers weakening. Things are breaking apart, they say. They're afraid the Dark One will get loose, is what. You'd think I was to blame the way some of them looked at me. Red Aja, anyway. But some others, too. The Amerlin seat. Yeah, I keep clear of them mostly. And clear of friends of Aes Sedai as well. You will, too, if you're smart. I'd like nothing better than to stay away from Aes Sedai, Baron said. Egwene gave him a sharp look. He hoped she would not burst out that she wanted to be an Aes Sedai. But she said nothing, though her mouth tightened and Perrin went on. It isn't as if we have a choice. We've had Trollocs chasing us and Fades and Drakkar. Everything but dark friends. We can't hide and we can't fight back alone. So who is going to help us? Who else is strong enough except Aes Sedai? Elias was silent for a time, looking at the wolves, most often at Dapple or Byrne. Perrin shifted nervously and tried not to watch. When he watched, he had the feeling that he could almost hear what Elias and the wolves were saying to one another. Even if it had nothing to do with the power, he wanted no part of it. He had to be making some crazy joke. I can't talk to wolves. One of the wolves, Hopper, he thought, looked at him and seemed to grin. He wondered how he had put a name to him. You could stay with me, Elias said finally. With us. Egwene's eyebrows shot up and Perrin's mouth dropped open. Well, what could be safer? Elias challenged. Trollocs will take any chance they get to kill a wolf by itself, but they go miles out of their way to avoid a pack. And you won't have to worry about Aes Sedai either. They don't often come into these woods. I don't know. Perrin avoided looking at the wolves to either side of him. One was Dapple, and he could feel her eyes on him. For one thing, it isn't just the Trollocs. Elias chuckled coldly. I've seen a pack pull down one of the Eyeless, too. Lost half the pack, but they wouldn't give up once they had it scent. Trollocs, Myrddraal, it's all one to the wolves. It's you they really want, boy. They've heard of other men who can talk to wolves, but you're the first they've ever met besides me. They'll accept your friend, too, though, and you'll all be safer here than in any city. There's dark friends in cities. Listen, Perrin said urgently. I wish you'd stop saying that. I can't do that. What you do, what you're saying. As you wish, boy. Play the goat if you've a mind to. Don't you want to be safe? I am not deceiving myself. There's nothing to deceive myself about. All we want... We are going to Caemlyn, Egwene spoke up firmly. And then to Tar Valon. Closing his mouth, Perrin met her angry look with one of his own. He knew that she followed his lead when she wanted to, and not when she did not. But she could at least let him answer for himself. What about you, Perrin? He said, and answered himself. Me? Well, let me think. Yes, I think I'll go on. He turned a mild smile on her. Well, Egwene, that makes both of us. I guess I'm going with you at that. Good to talk these things out before making a decision, isn't it? She blushed, but the set of her jaw never lessened. Elias grunted. Dapple said that's what you'd decide. She said the girl's planted firmly in the human world, while you, he nodded to Perrin, stand halfway between. Under the circumstances, I suppose we'd better go south with you. Otherwise, you'll probably starve to death or get lost or... Abruptly, Byrne stood up, and Elias turned his head to regard the big wolf. After a moment, Dapple rose too. She moved closer to Elias so that she also was meeting Byrne's stare. The tableau was frozen for long minutes. Then Byrne whirled and vanished into the night. Dapple shook herself, then resumed her place, flopping down as if nothing had happened. Elias met Perrin's questioning eyes. Dapple runs this pack, he explained. Some of the males could best her if they challenged, but she's smarter than any of them. And they all know it. She saved the pack more than once. But Byrne thinks the pack is wasting time with you three. Hating Trollocs is about all there is to him. And if there are Trollocs this far south, he wants to be off killing them. We quite understand, Egwene said, sounding relieved. We really can find our own way. With some directions, of course, if you'll give them. Elias waved a hand. I said Dapple leads this pack, didn't I? In the morning, I'll start south with you, and so will they. Egwene looked as if that was not the best news she could have heard. Perrin sat wrapped in his own silence. He could feel Byrne leaving. And the scarred male was not the only one. A dozen others, all young males, loped after him. He wanted to believe it was all Elias playing in his imagination, but he could not. Just before the departing wolves faded from his mind, he felt a thought he knew came from Byrne. as sharp and clear as if it were his own thought. Hatred. Hatred and the taste of blood. Chapter 24. Flight down the Arnell. Water dripped in the distance, hollow splashes echoing and re-echoing, losing their source forever. There were stone bridges and railless ramps everywhere, all sprouting off from broad, flat-topped stone spires, all polished and smooth and streaked with red and gold. Level on level, the maze stretched up and down through the murk, without any apparent beginning or end. Every bridge led to a spire, every ramp to another spire, other bridges. Whatever direction Rand looked, as far as his eye could make out in the dimness, it was the same, above as well as below. There was not enough light to see clearly, and he was almost glad of it. Some of those ramps led to platforms that had to be directly above the ones below. He could not see the base of any of them. He pressed, seeking freedom, knowing it was an illusion. Everything was illusion. He knew the illusion. He had followed it too many times not to know. However far he went, up or down, or in any direction, there was only the shiny stone. Stone. But the dankness of deep, fresh-turned earth permeated the air, and the sickly sweetness of decay. The smell of a grave opened out of its time. He tried not to breathe, but the smell filled his nostrils. It clung to his skin like oil. A flicker of motion caught his eye, and he froze where he was, half crouched against the polished guard wall around one of the spire tops. It was no hiding place. From 1,000 places a watcher could have seen him. Shadow filled the air, but there were no deeper shadows in which to hide. The light did not come from lamps or lanterns or torches. It was simply there, such as it was, as if it seeped out of the air. Enough by which to see, after a fashion. Enough by which to be seen. But stillness gave a little protection. The movement came again, and now it was clear. A man striding up a distant ramp, careless of the lack of railings and the drop to nothing below. The man's cloak rippled with his stately haste, and his head turned, searching. The distance was too far for Rand to see more than the shape in the murk, but he did not need to be closer to know the cloak was the red of fresh blood, that the searching eyes blazed like two furnaces. He tried tracing the maze with his eyes to see how many connections Baalzamon needed before reaching him, then gave it up as useless. Distances were deceiving here, another lesson he had learned. What seemed far away might be reached by turning a corner. What appeared close could be out of reach altogether. The only thing to do, as it had been from the beginning, was to keep moving. Keep moving and not think. Thinking was dangerous, he knew. Yet, as he turned away from Baalzamon's distant form, he could not help wondering about Matt. Was Matt somewhere in this maze? Or are there two mazes, two Baalzamons? His mind skittered away from that. It was too dreadful to dwell on. Is this like Bearlawn? Then why can't he find me? That was a little better. A small comfort. Comfort? Blood and ashes, where's the comfort in it? There had been 2 or 3 close brushes, though he could not remember them clearly, but for a long, long time. How long? He had run while Baalzamon vainly pursued. Was this like Bearlawn? Or was it only a nightmare, only a dream like other men's dreams? For an instant then, just for the length of time it took to take a breath, he knew why it was dangerous to think, what it was dangerous to think about. As it had before, every time he allowed himself to think of what surrounded him as a dream, the air shimmered, clouding his eyes. It turned to gel, holding him, just for an instant. The gritty heat prickled his skin, and his throat had long since gone dry as he trotted down the thorn hedge maze. How long had it been now? His sweat evaporated before it had a chance to bead, and his eyes burned. Overhead, and not too far overhead at that, boiled furious, steely clouds streaked with black, but not a breath of air stirred in the maze. For a moment he thought it had been different, but the thought evaporated in the heat. He had been here a long time. It was dangerous to think, he knew that. Smooth stones, pale and rounded, made a sketchy pavement, half buried in the bone-dry dust that rose in puffs at even his lightest step. It tickled his nose, threatening a sneeze that might give him away. When he tried to breathe through his mouth, dust clogged his throat until he choked. This was a dangerous place. He knew that, too. Ahead of him, he could see 3 openings in the high wall of thorns. Then the way curved out of sight. Balsamon could be approaching any one of those corners at that very moment. There had been 2 or 3 encounters already, though he could not remember much beyond that they had happened and that he had escaped. Somehow. Dangerous to think too much. Panting in the heat, he stopped to examine the maze wall. Thickly woven thorn bushes, brown and dead-looking, with cruel black thorns like inch-long hooks. Too tall to see over, too dense to see through. Gingerly he touched the wall and gasped. Despite all his care, a thorn pierced his finger, burning like a hot needle. He stumbled back, his heels catching on the stones, shaking his head and scattering thick drops of blood. The burn began to subside, but his whole hand throbbed. Abruptly, he forgot the pain. His heel had overturned one of the smooth stones, kicked it out of the dry ground. He stared at it, and empty eye sockets stared back. A skull. A human skull. He looked along the pathway at all the smooth, pale stones, all exactly alike. He shifted his feet hastily, but he could not move without walking on them, and he could not stay still without standing on them. A stray thought took vague shape that things might not be what they seemed, but he pushed it down ruthlessly. Thinking was dangerous here. He took a shaky hold on himself. Staying in one place was dangerous too. That was one of the things he knew dimly, but with certainty. The flow of blood from his finger had dwindled to a slow drip, and the throb was almost gone. Sucking his fingertip, he started down the path in the direction he happened to be facing. One way was as good as another in here. Now he remembered hearing once that you could get out of a maze by always turning in the same direction. At the first opening in the wall of thorns, he turned right, then right again at the next, and found himself face to face with Balsamon. Surprise flitted across Balsamon's face, and his blood-red cloak settled as he stopped short. Flames soared in his eyes, but in the heat of the maze, Rand barely felt them. How long do you think you can evade me, boy? How long do you think you can evade your fate? You are mine. Stumbling back, Rand wondered why he was fumbling at his belt as if for a sword. Light, help me, he muttered. Light, help me. He could not remember what it meant. The light will not help you, boy, and the eye of the world will not serve you. You are my hound, and if you will not course at my command, I will strangle you with the corpse of the great serpent. Balsamon stretched out his hand, and suddenly Rand knew a way to escape. A misty, half-formed memory that screamed danger, but nothing to the danger of being touched by the Dark One. A dream, Rand shouted. This is a dream. Balsamon's eyes began to widen, in surprise or anger or both. Then the air shimmered and his features blurred and faded. Rand turned about in one spot, staring at his own image thrown back at him 1,000-fold, 10,000-fold. Above was blackness and blackness below, but all around him stood mirrors. Mirrors set at every angle. Mirrors as far as he could see, all showing him crouched and turning, staring wide-eyed and frightened. A red blur drifted across the mirrors. He spun, trying to catch it, but in every mirror it drifted behind his own image and vanished. Then it was back again, but not as a blur. Balsamon strode across the mirrors, 10,000 Balsamons, searching, crossing and recrossing the silvery mirrors. He found himself staring at the reflection of his own face, pale and shivering in the knife-edge cold. Balsamon's image grew behind his, staring at him. Not seeing, but staring still. In every mirror, the flames of Balsamon's face raged behind him, enveloping, consuming, merging. He wanted to scream, but his throat was frozen. There was only one face in those endless mirrors. His own face. Balsamon's face. One face. Rand jerked and opened his eyes. Darkness lessened only slightly by a pale light. Barely breathing, he moved nothing except his eyes. A rough wool blanket covered him to his shoulders, and his head was cradled on his arms. He could feel smooth wooden planks beneath his hands. Deck planks. Rigging creaked in the night. He let out a long breath. He was on the spray. It was over. For another night, at least. Without thinking, he put his finger in his mouth. At the taste of blood, he stopped breathing. Slowly, he put his hand close to his face, to where he could see in the dim moonlight, where he could watch the bead of blood form on his fingertip. Blood from the prick of a thorn. The spray made haste slowly down the RNL. The wind came strong, but from directions that made the sails useless. With all Captain Doman's demand for speed, the vessel crept along. By night, a man in the bows cast a tallowed lead by lantern light, calling back the depth to the steersman, while the current carried her downriver against the wind with the sweeps pulled in. There were no rocks to fear in the RNL, but shallows and shoals there were aplenty, where a boat could go hard aground to remain, bows and more, dug into the mud, until help came. If it was help that came first. By day, the sweeps worked from sunrise to sunset, but the wind fought them as if it wanted to push the boat back upriver. They did not put into shore, neither by day nor by night. Bale Doman drove boat and crew alike hard, railing at the contrary winds, cursing the slow pace. He blistered the crew for sluggards at the oars and flayed them with his tongue for every mishandled line, his low, hard voice painting Trollocs 10 feet tall among them on the deck, ripping out their throats. For 2 days, that was enough to send every man leaping. Then the shock of the Trolloc attack began to fade, and men began to mutter about an hour to stretch their legs ashore and about the dangers of running downriver in the dark. The crew kept their grumbles quiet, watching out of the corners of their eyes to make sure Captain Doman was not close enough to hear. But he seemed to hear everything said on his boat. Each time the grumblings began, he silently brought out the long, scythe-like sword and cruelly hooked axe that had been found on the deck after the attack. He would hang them on the mast for an hour, and those who had been wounded would finger their bandages, and the mutterings quieted. For a day or so at least, until one or another of the crew began thinking once more that surely they had left the Trollocs far behind by now, and the cycle began yet again. Rand noticed that Tom Maryland stayed clear of the crew when they began whispering together and frowning, though usually he was slapping backs and telling jokes and exchanging banter in a way that put a grin on even the hardest working man. Tom watched those secretive mutters with a wary eye while appearing to be absorbed in lighting his long-stemmed pipe or tuning his harp, or almost anything except paying any mind at all to the crew. Rand did not understand why. It was not the 3 who had come aboard chased by Trollocs whom the crew seemed to blame, but rather Flor and Gelb. For the first day or two, Gelb's wiry figure could almost always be found addressing any crewman he could corner, telling his version of the night Rand and the others came on board. Gelb's manner slid from bluster to whines and back again, and his lip always curled when he pointed to Tom or Matt, or especially Rand, trying to lay the blame on them. "They're strangers," Gelb pleaded, quietly and with an eye out for the captain. "What do we know of them? The Trollocs came with them. That's what we know. They're in league." "Fortune, Gelb, stow it," growled a man with his hair in a pigtail and a small blue star tattooed on his cheek. He did not look at Gelb as he coiled a line on deck, working it in with his bare toes. All the sailors went barefoot despite the cold. Boots could slip on a wet deck. "You'd call your mother, dark friend, if it had let you slack. Get away from me." He spat on Gelb's foot and went back to the line. All the crew remembered the watch Gelb had not kept, and the pig-tailed man's was the politest response he got. No one even wanted to work with him. Gelb found himself relegated to solitary tasks, all of them filthy, such as scrubbing the galley's greasy pots or crawling into the bilges on his belly to search for leaks among years of slime. Soon he stopped talking to anyone. His shoulders took on a defensive hunch, and injured silence became his stance. The more people watching, the more injured, though it earned him no more than a grunt. When Gelb's eyes fell on Rand, however, or on Matt or Tom, murder flashed across his long-nosed face. When Rand mentioned to Matt that Gelb would cause them trouble sooner or later, Matt looked around the boat saying, "Can't we trust any of them? Any at all?" Then he went off to find a place where he could be alone, or as alone as he could get, on a boat less than 30 paces from its raised bow to the stern post, where the steering oars were mounted. Matt had spent too much time alone since the night at Shadar Logoth, brooding, as Rand saw it. Tom said, "Trouble won't come from Gelb, boy, if it comes. Not yet, at least. None of the crew will back him, and he hasn't the nerve to try anything alone. But the others now. Doman almost seems to think the Trollocs are chasing him personally, but the rest are beginning to think the danger is past. They might just decide they have had enough. They're on the edge of it as it is." He hitched his patch-covered cloak, and Rand had the feeling he was checking his hidden knives, his second-best set. "If they mutiny, boy, they won't leave passengers behind to tell the tale. The Queen's writ might not have much force this far from Camelin, but even a village mayor will do something about that." That was when Rand, too, began trying not to be noticed when he watched the crewmen. Tom did his part in diverting the crew from thoughts of mutiny. He told stories with all the flourishes every morning and every night, and in between he played any song they requested. To support the notion that Rand and Matt wanted to be apprentice gleemen, he set aside a time each day for lessons, and that was an entertainment for the crew as well. He would not let either of them touch his harp, of course, and their sessions with the flute produced pained winces in the beginning, at least, and laughter from the crew even while they were covering their ears. He taught the boys some of the easier stories, a little simple tumbling, and of course juggling. Matt complained about what Tom demanded of them, but Tom blew out his mustaches and glared right back. "I don't know how to play a teaching boy. I either teach a thing or I don't. Now, even a country bumpkin ought to be able to do a simple handstand. Up you go." Crewmen who were not working always gathered, squatting in a circle around the three. Some even tried their hand at the lessons Tom taught, laughing at their own fumblings. Gelb stood alone and watched it all darkly, hating them all. A good part of each day Rand spent leaning on the railing, staring at the shore. It was not that he really expected to see Egwene or any of the others suddenly appear on the riverbank, but the boat traveled so slowly that he sometimes hoped for it. They could catch up without riding too hard, if they had escaped, if they were still alive. The river rolled on without any sign of life, nor any boat to be seen except the spray. But that was not to say there was nothing to see and wonder at. In the middle of the first day, the Arnell ran between high bluffs that stretched for half a mile on either side. For that whole length, the stone had been cut into figures, men and women 100 feet tall, with crowns proclaiming them kings and queens. No two were alike in that royal procession, and long years separated the first from the last. Wind and rain had worn those at the north end smooth and almost featureless, with faces and details becoming more distinct as they went south. The river lapped around the statues' feet washed to smooth nubs, those that were not gone completely. How long have they stood there, Rand wondered. How long for the river to wear away so much stone? None of the crew so much as looked up from their work. They had seen the ancient carving so many times before. Another time, when the eastward shore had become flat grassland again, broken only occasionally by thickets, the sun glinted off something in the distance. What can that be? Rand wondered aloud. It looks like metal. Captain Doman was walking by, and he paused, squinting toward the glint. It do be metal, he said. His words still ran together, but Rand had come to understand without having to puzzle it out. A tower of metal. I've seen it up close, and I know. River traders use it as a marker. We'll be 10 days from Whitebridge at the rate we go. A metal tower? Rand said, and Matt, sitting cross-legged with his back against a barrel, roused from his brooding to listen. The captain nodded. Aye, shining steel by the look and feel of it, but no a spot of rust. 200 feet high it be, as big around as a house, with no mark on it and never an opening to be found. I'll bet there's treasure inside, Matt said. He stood up and stared toward the far tower as the river carried the spray beyond it. A thing like that must have been made to protect something valuable. Mayhap, lad, the captain rumbled. There'll be stranger things in the world than this, though. On Tremalking, one of the sea folks' isles, there'll be a stone hand 50 feet high sticking out of a hill, clutching a crystal sphere as big as this vessel. There'll be treasure under that hill if there be treasure anywhere. But the island people want no part of digging there, and the sea folk care for naught but sailing their ships and searching for the Cormor, their chosen one. I'd dig, Matt said. How far is this Tremalking? A clump of trees slid in front of the shining tower, but he stared as if he could see it yet. Captain Doman shook his head. No, lad. It no be the treasure that makes for seeing the world. If you find yourself a fistful of gold, or some dead king's jewels, all well and good. But it be the strangeness, you see, that pulls you to the next horizon. In Tonchico, that be a port on the Arth Ocean. Part of the Monarch's palace were built in the age of legend, so it be said. There be a wall there, with a frieze showing animals no man living has ever seen. Any child can draw an animal nobody's ever seen, Rand said, and the captain chuckled. Aye, lad, so they can. But can a child make the bones of those animals? In Tonchico they have them, all fastened together like the animal was. They stand in a part of the Monarch's palace, where any can enter and see. The breaking left 1,000 wonders behind, and there have been half a dozen empires or more since, some rivaling Arthur Hawkwing's, every one leaving things to see and find. Light sticks and razor lace and heartstone, a crystal lattice covering an island, and it hums when the moon is up. A mountain hollowed into a bowl, and in its center, a silver spike 100 spans high, and any who comes within a mile of it dies. Rusted ruins and broken bits, and things found in the bottom of the sea. Things not even the oldest books know the meaning of. I've gathered a few myself. Things you never dreamed of in more places than you can see in 10 lifetimes. That be the strangeness that will draw you on. We used to dig up bones in the sand hills, Rand said slowly. Strange bones. There was part of a fish. I think it was a fish. As big as this boat once. Some said it was bad luck, digging in the hills. The captain eyed him shrewdly. You thinking about home already, lad? And you just set out in the world? The world will put a hook in your mouth. You'll set off chasing the sunset you wait and see. And if you ever go back, your village will be no big enough to hold you. No, he gave a start. How long had it been since he had thought of home, of Emmons Field? And what of Tam? It had to be days. It felt like months. I will go home. One day, when I can. I'll raise sheep like my father. And if I never leave again, it will be too soon. Isn't that right, Matt? As soon as we can, we're going home and forget all this even exists. With a visible effort, Matt pulled away from staring upriver after the vanished tower. What? Oh. Yes, of course. We'll go home, of course. As he turned to go, Rand heard him muttering under his breath. I'll bet he just doesn't want anybody else going after the treasure. He did not seem to realize he had spoken aloud. 4 days into their trip downriver found Rand atop the mast, sitting on the blunt end, with his legs wrapped in the stays. The spray rolled gently on the river, but 50 feet above the water, that easy roll made the top of the mast sway back and forth through wide arcs. He threw back his head and laughed into the wind that blew in his face. The oars were out, and from here, the boat looked like some 12-legged spider creeping down the RNL. He had been as high as this before, in trees back in the Two Rivers, but this time there were no branches to block his view. Everything on deck, the sailors at the sweeps, men on their knees scrubbing the deck with smooth stones, men doing things with lines and hatch covers, looked so odd when seen from right overhead, all squat and foreshortened, that he had spent an hour just staring at them and chuckling. He still chuckled whenever he looked down at them. but now he was staring at the riverbanks flowing by. That was the way it seemed, as if he were still, except for the swaying back and forth, of course, and the banks slid slowly by, trees and hills marching along to either side. He was still, and the whole world moved past him. On sudden impulse, he unwrapped his legs from the stays bracing the mast and held his arms and legs out to either side, balancing against the sway. For 3 complete arcs, he kept his balance like that. Then suddenly it was gone. Arms and legs windmilling, he toppled forward and grabbed the forestay. Legs splayed to either side of the mast, nothing holding him to his precarious perch but his 2 hands on the stay, he laughed. Gulping huge breaths of fresh, cold wind, he laughed with the exhilaration of it. "Lad," came Tom's hoarse voice. "Lad, if you're trying to break your fool neck, don't do it by falling on me." Rand looked down. Tom clung to the ratlines just below him, staring up the last few feet grimly. Like Rand, the gleeman had left his cloak below. "Tom," he said delightedly. "Tom, when did you come up here?" "When you wouldn't pay any attention to people shouting at you. Burn me, boy. You've got everybody thinking you've gone mad." He looked down and was surprised to see all the faces staring up at him. Only Matt, sitting cross-legged up in the bows with his back to the mast, was not looking at him. Even the men at the oars had their eyes raised, letting their stroke go ragged, and no one was berating them for it. Rand twisted his head around to look under his arm at the stern. Captain Doman stood by the steering oar, ham-like fists on his hips, glaring at him atop the mast. He turned back to grin at Tom. "You want me to come down, then?" Tom nodded vigorously. "I would appreciate it greatly." "All right." Shifting his grip on the forestay, he sprang forward off the mast top. He heard Tom bite off an oath as his fall was cut short, and he dangled from the forestay by his hands. The gleeman scowled at him, one hand half stretched out to catch him. He grinned at Tom again. "I'm going down now." Swinging his legs up, he hooked one knee over the thick line that ran from the mast to the bow, then caught it in the crook of his elbow, and let go with his hands. Slowly, then with increasing speed, he slid down. Just short of the bow, he dropped to his feet on the deck right in front of Matt, took one step to catch his balance, and turned to face the boat with his arms spread wide, the way Tom did after a tumbling trick. Scattered clapping rose from the crew, but he was looking down at Matt in surprise, and at what Matt held, hidden from everybody else by his body. A curved dagger with a gold scabbard worked in strange symbols. Fine gold wire wrapped the hilt, which was capped by a ruby as big as Rand's thumbnail, and the quillons were golden scaled serpents bearing their fangs. Matt continued to slide the dagger in and out of its sheath for a moment. Still playing with the dagger, he raised his head slowly. His eyes had a faraway look. Suddenly they focused on Rand, and he gave a start and stuffed the dagger under his coat. Rand squatted on his heels with his arms crossed on his knees. "Where did you get that?" Matt said nothing, looking quickly to see if anyone else was close by. They were alone, for a wonder. "You didn't take it from Shadar Logoth, did you?" Matt stared at him. "It's your fault. Yours and Perrin's. The 2 of you pulled me away from the treasure, and I had it in my hand. Mordeth didn't give it to me. I took it, so Moraine's warnings about his gifts don't count. You won't tell anybody, Rand. They might try to steal it." "I won't tell anybody," Rand said. "I think Captain Doman is honest, but I wouldn't put anything past the rest of them, especially Gelb." "Not anybody," Matt insisted. "Not Doman, not Tom, not anybody. We're the only 2 left from Emmons Field, Rand. We can't afford to trust anybody else." "They're alive, Matt. Egwene and Perrin, I know they're alive." Matt looked ashamed. "I'll keep your secret, though. Just the 2 of us. At least we don't have to worry about money now. We can sell it for enough to travel to Tarvalin like kings." "Of course," Matt said after a minute. "If we have to. Just don't tell anybody until I say so." "I said I wouldn't. Listen, have you had any more dreams since we came on the boat? Like in Baerlon? This is the first chance I've had to ask without 6 people listening." Matt turned his head away, giving a sidelong look. Maybe. What do you mean, maybe? Either you have or you haven't. All right, I have. I don't want to talk about it. I don't even want to think about it. It doesn't do any good. Before either of them could say more, Tom came striding up the deck, his cloak over his arm. The wind whipped his white hair about, and his long mustaches seemed to bristle. I managed to convince the captain you aren't crazy, he announced. That it was part of your training. He caught hold of the forestay and shook it. That fool stunt of yours, sliding down the rope, helped. But you are lucky you didn't break your fool neck. Rand's eyes went to the forestay and followed it up to the top of the mast. And as they did, his mouth dropped open. He had slid down that. And he had been sitting on top of... Suddenly he could see himself up there, arms and legs spread wide. He sat down hard and barely caught himself short of ending up flat on his back. Tom was looking at him thoughtfully. I didn't know you had such a good head for heights, lad. We might be able to play in Ilion, or Abu Dar, or even Tyr. People in the big cities in the south like tightrope walkers and slackwire artists. We're going to... At the last minute, Rand remembered to look around for anyone close enough to overhear. Several of the crew were watching them, including Gelb, glaring as usual, but none could hear what he was saying. To Tar Valon, he finished. Matt shrugged as if it were all the same to him where they went. At the moment, lad, Tom said, settling down beside them. But tomorrow, who knows? That's the way with a Gleeman's life. He took a handful of colored balls from one of his wide sleeves. Since I have you down out of the air, we'll work on the triple crossover. Rand's gaze drifted to the top of the mast, and he shivered. What's happening to me? Like what? He had to find out. He had to get to Tar Valon before he really did go mad. Chapter 25. The Traveling People. Bella walked along placidly under the weak sun, as if the three wolves trotting not far off were only village dogs. But the way she rolled her eyes at them from time to time, showing white all the way around, indicated she felt nothing of the sort. Egwene on the mare's back was just as bad. She watched the wolves constantly from the corner of her eye, and sometimes she twisted in the saddle to look around. Perrin was sure she was hunting for the rest of the pack, though she denied it angrily when he suggested as much, denied being afraid of the wolves that paced them, denied worrying about the rest of the pack for what it was up to. She denied and went right on looking, tied-eyed and wetting her lips uneasily. The rest of the pack was far distant. He could have told her that. What good, even if she believed me, especially if she did? He was of no mind to open that basket of snakes until he had to. He did not want to think about how he knew. The fur-clad man loped ahead of them, sometimes looking almost like a wolf himself, and he never looked around when Dapple, Hopper, and the Wind appeared, but he knew too. The Emmons Fielders had wakened at dawn that first morning to find Elias cooking more rabbit and watching them over his full beard without much expression. Except for Dapple, Hopper, and Wind, no wolves were to be seen. In the pale early daylight, deep shade still lingered under the big oak, and the bare trees beyond looked like fingers stripped to the bone. They're around, Elias answered when Egwene asked where the rest of the pack had gone. Close enough to help, if need be. Far enough off to avoid any human trouble we get into. Sooner or later, there's always trouble when there's two humans together. If we need them, they'll be there. Something tickled the back of Perrin's mind as he ripped free a bite of roast rabbit. A direction vaguely sensed. Of course. That's where they... The hot juices in his mouth abruptly lost all taste. He picked at the tubers Elias had cooked in the coals. They tasted something like turnips, but his appetite was gone. When they had started out, Egwene insisted that everyone take a turn riding, and Perrin did not even bother to argue. First turn is yours, he told her. She nodded. And then you, Elias. My own legs are good enough for me, Elias said. He looked at Bella, and the mare rolled her eyes as if he were one of the wolves. Besides, I don't think she wants me riding her. That's nonsense, Egwene replied firmly. There's no point in being stubborn about it. The sensible thing is for everybody to ride sometimes. According to you, we have a long way still to go." "I said no, girl." She took a deep breath, and Perrin was wondering if she would succeed in bullying Elias the way she did him, when he realized she was standing there with her mouth open, not saying a word. Elias was looking at her, just looking, with those yellow wolf's eyes. Egwene stepped back from the raw-boned man and licked her lips, and stepped back again. Before Elias turned away, she had backed all the way to Bella and scrambled up onto the mare's back. As the man turned to lead them south, Perrin thought his grin was a good deal like a wolf's, too. For 3 days they traveled in that manner, walking and riding south and east all day, stopping only when twilight thickened. Elias seemed to scorn the haste of city men, but he did not believe in wasting time when there was somewhere to go. The 3 wolves were seldom seen. Each night they came to the fire for a time, and sometimes in the day they showed themselves briefly, appearing close at hand when least expected, and vanishing in the same manner. Perrin knew they were out there, though, and where. He knew when they were scouting the path ahead, and when they were watching the back trail. He knew when they left the pack's usual hunting grounds, and Dapple sent the pack back to wait for her. Sometimes the 3 that remained faded from his mind, but long before they were close enough to see again, he was aware of them returning. Even when the trees dwindled to wide scattered groves separated by great swaths of winter-dead grass, they were as ghosts when they did not want to be seen. But he could have pointed a finger straight at them at any time. He did not know how he knew, and he tried to convince himself that it was just his imagination playing tricks, but it did no good. Just as Elias knew, he knew. He tried not thinking about wolves, but they crept into his thoughts all the same. He had not dreamed about Baalzamon since meeting Elias and the wolves. His dreams, as much as he remembered of them on waking, were of everyday things, just as he might have dreamed at home, before Baerlon, before winter night. Normal dreams, with one addition. In every dream, he remembered there was a point where he straightened from Master Luhan's forge to wipe the sweat from his face, or turned from dancing with the village girls on the green, or lifted his head from a book in front of the fireplace, and whether he was outside or under a roof, there was a wolf close to hand. Always the wolf's back was to him, and always he knew, in the dreams it seemed the normal course of things, even at Alsbeth Luhan's dinner table, that the wolf's yellow eyes were watching for what might come, guarding against what might come. Only when he was awake did the dreams seem strange. 3 days they journeyed, with Dapple, Hopper, and Wind bringing them rabbits and squirrels, and Elias pointing out plants, few of which Perrin recognized as good to eat. Once a rabbit burst out, almost from under Bella's hooves. Before Perrin could get a stone in his sling, Elias skewered it with his long knife at 20 paces. Another time Elias brought down a fat pheasant on the wing with his bow. They ate far better than they had when on their own, but Perrin would as soon have gone back on short rations if it had meant different company. He was not sure how Egwene felt, but he would have been willing to go hungry if he could do it without the wolves. 3 days into the afternoon. A stand of trees lay ahead, larger than most they had seen, a good 4 miles across. The sun sat low in the western sky, pushing slanted shadows off to their right, and the wind was picking up. Perrin felt the wolves give over quartering behind them and start forward, not hurrying. They had smelled and seen nothing dangerous. Egwene was taking her turn on Bella. It was time to start looking for a camp for the night, and the big copse would serve the purpose well. As they came close to the trees, 3 mastiffs burst from cover, broad-muzzled dogs as tall as the wolves and even heavier, teeth bared in loud rumbling snarls. They stopped short as soon as they were in the open, but no more than 30 feet separated them from the 3 people, and their dark eyes kindled with a killing light. Bella, already on edge from the wolves, whinnied and almost unseated Egwene, but Perrin had his sling whirling around his head in an instant. No need to use the axe on dogs. A stone in the ribs would send the worst dog running. Elias waved a hand at him without taking his eyes from the stiff-legged dogs. Hist! None of that now. Perrin gave him a puzzled frown, but let the sling slow its spin and finally fall to his side. Egwene managed to get Bella under control. She and the mare both watched the dogs warily. The mastiff's hackles stood stiff, and their ears were laid back, and their growls sounded like earthquakes. Abruptly, Elias raised one finger shoulder high and whistled, a long, shrill whistle that rose higher and did not end. The growls cut off raggedly. The dogs stepped back, whining and turning their heads as if they wanted to go, but were held. Their eyes remained locked to Elias's finger. Slowly, Elias lowered his hand, and the pitch of his whistle lowered with it. The dogs followed until they lay flat on the ground, their tongues lolling from their mouths. 3 tails wagged. "See," Elias said, walking to the dogs. "There's no need for weapons." The mastiffs licked his hands, and he scratched their broad heads and fondled their ears. "They look meaner than they are. They meant to frighten us off, and they wouldn't have bitten unless we tried to go into the trees. Anyway, there's no worry of that now. We can make the next thicket before full dark." When Perrin looked at Egwene, her mouth was hanging open. He shut his own mouth with a click of teeth. Still patting the dogs, Elias studied the stand of trees. "There'll be Tuatha here, the traveling people." They stared at him blankly, and he added, "Tinkers." "Tinkers?" Perrin exclaimed. "I've always wanted to see the Tinkers. They camp across the river from Tarn Ferry sometimes, but they don't come down into the 2 rivers as far as I know. I don't know why not." Egwene sniffed. "Probably because the Tarn Ferry folk are as great thieves as the Tinkers. They'd no doubt end up stealing each other blind. Master Elias, if there really are Tinkers close by, shouldn't we go on? We don't want Bella stolen, and, well, we do not have much else, but everybody knows Tinkers will steal anything." "Including infants?" Elias asked dryly. "Kidnap children and all that?" He spat, and she blushed. "Those stories about babies were told sometimes, but most often by Sen Bui or one of the Coplans or Congers. The other tales everybody knew. The Tinkers make me sick sometimes, but they don't steal any more than most folks. A good bit less than some I know." "It will be getting dark soon, Elias," Perrin said. "We have to camp somewhere. Why not with them, if they'll have us?" Mistress Luhan had a tinker-mended pot that she claimed was better than new. Master Luhan was not too happy about his wife's praise of the tinker work, but Perrin wanted to see how it was done. Yet there was a reluctance about Elias that he did not understand. "Is there some reason we shouldn't?" Elias shook his head, but the reluctance was still there in the set of his shoulders and the tightness of his mouth. "May as well. Just don't pay any mind to what they say. A lot of foolishness. Most times the traveling people do things any which way. But there's times they set a store by formality. So you do what I do. And keep your secrets. No need to tell the world everything." The dogs trailed along beside them, wagging their tails as Elias led the way into the trees. Perrin felt the wolves slow and knew they would not enter. They were not afraid of the dogs. They were contemptuous of dogs, who had given up freedom to sleep by a fire. But people they avoided. Elias walked surely, as if he knew the way, and near the center of the stand the Tinkers' wagons appeared, scattered among the oak and ash. Like everyone else in Emmons Field, Perrin had heard a good deal about the Tinkers, even if he had never seen any, and the camp was just what he expected. Their wagons were small houses on wheels, tall wooden boxes lacquered and painted in bright colors, reds and blues and yellows and greens, and some hues to which he could not put a name. The traveling people were going about work that was disappointingly every day, cooking, sewing, tending children, mending harness, but their clothes were even more colorful than the wagons, and seemingly chosen at random. Sometimes coat and breeches, or dress and shawl, went together in a way that hurt the eyes. They looked like butterflies in a field of wild flowers. 4 or 5 men in different places around the camp played fiddles and flutes, and a few people danced like rainbow-hued hummingbirds. Children and dogs ran playing among the cook fires. The dogs were mastiffs, just like those that had confronted the travelers, but the children tugged at their ears and tails and climbed on their backs, and the massive dogs accepted it all placidly. The three with Elias, tongues hanging out, looked up at the bearded man as if he were their best friend. Aaron shook his head. They were still big enough to reach a man's throat while barely getting their front feet off the ground. Abruptly, the music stopped, and he realized all the tinkers were looking at him and his companions. Even the children and dogs stood still and watched, warily, as if on the point of flight. For a moment, there was no sound at all. Then a wiry man, gray-haired and short, stepped forward and bowed gravely to Elias. He wore a high-collared red coat and baggy bright green trousers tucked into knee boots. "You are welcome to our fires. Do you know the song?" Elias bowed in the same way, both hands pressed to his chest. "Your welcome warms my spirit, Mahdi.
Hey, Fire, how you doing, bro?
But I do not know the song."
I got a couple rolled up too. Give me 1 second.
The gray-haired man intoned. "As it was, so shall it be, if we but remember, seek, and find." He swept an arm toward the fires with a smile, and his voice took on a cheerful lightness. "The meal is almost ready. Join us, please." As if that had been a signal, the music sprang up again, and the children took up their laughter and ran with the dogs. Everyone in the camp went back to what they had been doing, just as though the newcomers were long-accepted friends. The gray-haired man hesitated, though, and looked at Elias. "Your other friends?
Hell yeah.
They will stay away? They frightened the poor dogs so."
Hell yeah, that's good.
They'll stay away, Rain.
Fire.
Elias's headshake had a touch of scorn. "You should know that by now." The gray-haired man spread his hands as if to say nothing was ever certain. As he turned to lead them into the camp, Egwene dismounted and moved close to Elias. "You two are friends?" A smiling tinker appeared to take Bella. Egwene gave the reins up reluctantly after a wry snort from Elias. "We know each other," the fur-clad man replied curtly. "His name is Mahdi," Perrin said. Elias growled something under his breath. "His name's Rain. Mahdi's his title. Seeker. He's the leader of this band. You can call him Seeker if the other sounds odd. He won't mind." "What was that about a song?" Egwene asked. "That's why they travel," Elias said, "or so they say. They're looking for a song. That's what the Mahdi seeks. They say they lost it during the breaking of the world, and if they can find it again, the paradise of the Age of Legends will return." He ran his eye around the camp and snorted. "They don't even know what the song is. They claim they'll know it when they find it. They don't know how it's supposed to bring paradise either, but they've been looking near to 3,000 years, ever since the breaking. I expect they'll be looking until the wheel stops turning." They reached Rain's fire then, in the middle of the camp. The Seeker's wagon was yellow, trimmed in red, and the spokes of its tall, red-rimmed wheels alternated red and yellow. A plump woman, as gray as Rain, but smooth-cheeked still, came out of the wagon and paused on the steps at its back end, straightening a blue-fringed shawl on her shoulders. Her blouse was yellow and her skirt red, both bright. The combination made Perrin blink, and Egwene made a strangled sound. When she saw the people following Rain, the woman came down with a welcoming smile. She was Ila, Rain's wife, a head taller than her husband, and she soon made Perrin forget about the colors of her clothes. She had a motherliness that reminded him of Mistress Alvear and had him feeling welcome from her first smile. Ila greeted Elias as an
round one started,
but with a distance that seemed to pain Rain. Elias gave her a dry grin and a nod. Perrin and Egwene introduced themselves, and she clasped their hands in both of hers with much more warmth than she had shown Elias, even hugging Egwene. Why, you're a lovely child, she said, cupping Egwene's chin and smiling. And chilled to the bone, too, I expect. You sit close to the fire, Egwene. All of you sit. Supper is almost ready. Fallen logs had been pulled around the fire for sitting. Elias refused even that concession to civilization. He lounged on the ground instead. Iron tripods held 2 small kettles over the flames, and an oven rested in the edge of the coals. Hila tended them. As Perrin and the others were taking their places, a slender young man wearing green stripes strolled up to the fire. He gave Rain a hug and Hila a kiss, and ran a cool eye over Elias and the Emmons Fielders. He was about the same age as Perrin, and he moved as if he were about to begin dancing with his next step. Well, Aram, Hila smiled fondly. You have decided to eat with your old grandparents for a change, have you? Her smile slid over to Egwene as she bent to stir a kettle hanging over the cook fire. I wonder why. Aram settled to an easy crouch, with his arms crossed on his knees across the fire from Egwene. I am Aram, he told her in a low, confident voice. He no longer seemed aware that anyone was there except her. I have waited for the first rose of spring, and now I find it at my grandfather's fire. Perrin waited for Egwene to snicker, then saw that she was staring back at Aram. He looked at the young tinker again. Aram had more than his share of good looks. After a minute, Perrin knew who the fellow reminded him of. Will Alcine, who had all the girls staring and whispering behind his back whenever he came up from Devon Ride to Emmons Field. Will courted every girl in sight and managed to convince every one of them that he was just being polite to all the others. Those dogs of yours, Perrin said loudly, and Egwene gave a start. Look as big as bears. I'm surprised you let the children play with them. Aram's smile slipped, but when he looked at Perrin, it came back again, even more sure than before. They will not harm you. They make a show to frighten away danger and warn us, but they are trained according to the way of the leaf. The way of the leaf? Egwene said. What is that? Aram gestured to the trees, his eyes fastened intently on hers. The leaf does not struggle against the wind that carries it away. The leaf does no harm, and finally falls to nourish new leaves. So it should be with all men and women. Egwene stared back at him, a faint blush rising in her cheeks. But what does that mean? Perrin said. Aram gave him an irritated glance, but it was Rain who answered. It means that no man should harm another for any reason whatsoever. The Seeker's eyes flickered to Elias. There is no excuse for violence. None. Not ever. What if somebody attacks you? Perrin insisted. What if somebody hits you or tries to rob you or kill you? Rain sighed, a patient sigh, as if Perrin was just not seeing what was so clear to him. If a man hit me, I would ask him why he wanted to do such a thing. If he still wanted to hit me,
that's badass.
As I would
At least you be stocked up on some wax, on some dabs.
Even my life, than that I should do violence. And I would hope that he was not harmed too greatly. But you said you wouldn't hurt him, Perrin said. I would not. But violence harms the one who does it as much as the one who receives it. Perrin looked doubtful. You could cut down a tree with your axe, Rain said. The axe does violence to the tree and escapes unharmed. Is that how you see it? Wood is soft compared to steel. But the sharp steel is dulled as it chops, and the sap of the tree will rust and pit it. The mighty axe does violence to the helpless tree and is harmed by it. So it is with men, though the harm is in the spirit. But enough, Elias growled, cutting Perrin off. Rain, it's bad enough you trying to convert village younglings to that nonsense. It gets you in trouble almost everywhere you go, doesn't it?
Oh,
but I didn't bring this lot here for you to work on them. Leave over. And leave them to you, Hila said, grinding herbs between her palms and letting them trickle into one of the kettles. Her voice was calm, but her hands rubbed the herbs furiously. Will you teach them your way? To kill or die? Will you lead them to the fate you seek for yourself? Dying alone with only the ravens and your friends to squabble over your body? Be at peace, Hila, Rain said gently, as if he had heard this all and more 100 times. He has been welcomed to our fire, my wife. Hila subsided, but Perrin noticed that she made no apology. Instead, she looked at Elias and shook her head sadly, then dusted her hands and began taking spoons and pottery bowls from a red chest on the side of the wagon. Rain turned back to Elias. My old friend, how many times must I tell you that we do not try to convert anyone? When village people are curious about our ways, we answer their questions. It is most often the young who ask, true, and sometimes one of them will come with us when we journey on. But it is of their own free will. You tried telling that to some farm wife who's just found out her son or daughter has run off with you tinkers, Elias said wryly. That's why the bigger towns won't even let you camp nearby. Villages put up with you for your mending things, but the cities don't need it. And they don't like you talking their young folks into running off. I would not know what the cities allow. Rain's patience seemed inexhaustible. He certainly did not appear to be getting angry at all. There are always violent men in cities. In any case, I do not think the song could be found in a city. I don't mean to offend you, Seeker, Baron said slowly, but, well, I don't look for violence. I don't think I've even wrestled anybody in years except for feast day games. But if somebody hit me, I'd hit him back. If I didn't, I would just be encouraging him to think he could hit me whenever he wanted to. Some people think they can take advantage of others, and if you don't let them know they can't, they'll just go around bullying anybody weaker than they are. Some people, Aram said with a heavy sadness, can never overcome their baser instincts. He said it with a look at Perrin that made it clear he was not talking about the bullies Perrin spoke of. I'll bet you get to run away a lot, Perrin said. And the young tinker's face tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the way of the leaf. I think it is interesting, Egwene said, glaring at Perrin, to meet someone who doesn't believe his muscles can solve every problem. Aram's good spirits returned, and he stood, offering her his hand with a smile. Let me show you our camp. There is dancing. I would like that. She smiled back. Hila straightened from taking loaves of bread from the small iron oven. But supper is ready, Aram. I'll eat with Mother, Aram said over his shoulder, as he drew Egwene away from the wagon by her hand. We will both eat with Mother. He flashed a triumphant smile at Perrin. Egwene was laughing as they ran. Perrin got to his feet, then stopped. It was not as if she could come to any harm, not if the camp followed this way of the leaf, as Rain said. Looking at Rain and Hila, both staring dejectedly after their grandson, he said, I'm sorry. I am a guest, and I shouldn't have... Don't be foolish, Hila said soothingly. It was his fault, not yours. Sit down and eat. Aram is a troubled young man, Rain added sadly. He is a good boy, but sometimes I think he finds the way of the leaf a hard way. Some do, I fear. Please, my fire is yours. Please? Perrin sat back down slowly, still feeling awkward. What happens to somebody who can't follow the way, he asked. A tinker, I mean. Rain and Hila exchanged a worried look, and Rain said, They leave us. The lost go to live in the villages. Hila stared in the direction her grandson had gone. The lost cannot be happy. She sighed, but her face was placid again when she handed out the bowls and spoons. Perrin stared at the ground, wishing he had not asked, and there was no more talk while Hila filled their bowls with the thick vegetable stew and handed out thick slices of her crusty bread. nor while they ate. The stew was delicious, and Perrin finished 3 bowls before he stopped. Elias, he noted with a grin, emptied 4. After the meal, Rain filled his pipe, and Elias produced his own and stuffed it from Rain's oilskin pouch. When the lighting and tamping and relighting were done, they settled back in silence. Hila took out a bundle of knitting. The sun was only a blaze of red above the treetops to the west. The camp had settled in for the night, but the bustle did not slow, only changed. The musicians who had been playing when they entered the camp had been replaced by others, and even more people than before danced in the light of the fires, their shadows leaping against the wagons. Somewhere in the camp, a chorus of male voices rose. Perrin slid down in front of the log and soon felt himself dozing. After a time, Rain said, "Have you visited any of the Tuatha, Elias, since you were with us last spring?" Perrin's eyes drifted open and half shut again. "No," Elias replied around his pipe stem. "I don't like being around too many people at once." Rain chuckled. "Especially people who live in a way so opposite to your own, eh?" "No, my old friend, don't worry. I gave up years ago hoping you would come to the way. But I have heard a story since last we met, and if you have not heard it yet, it might interest you. It interests me, and I have heard it again and again, every time we meet others of the people." "I'll listen." "It begins in the spring 2 years ago, with a band of the people who were crossing the waste by the northern route." Perrin's eyes shot open. "The waste? The Aiel waste? They were crossing the Aiel waste?" "Some people can enter the waste without being bothered," Elias said. "Fleemen, peddlers, if they're honest. The Tuatha cross the waste all the time. Merchants from Cairian used to, before the tree and the Aiel War." "The Aielmen avoid us," Rain said sadly, "though many of us have tried to speak with them. They watch us from a distance, but they will not come near us nor let us come near them. Sometimes I worry that they might know the song, though I suppose it isn't likely. Among Aiel, men do not sing, you know. Isn't that strange? From the time an Aiel boy becomes a man, he will not sing anything but battle chants or their dirge for the slain. I have heard them singing over their dead and over those they have killed. That song is one to make the stones weep." Hila, listening, nodded agreement over her knitting. Perrin did some quick rethinking. He had thought the Tinkers must be afraid all the time, with all this talk of running away. But no one who was afraid would even think of crossing the Aiel waste. From what he had heard, no one who was sane would try crossing the waste. "If this is some story about a song," Elias began, but Rain shook his head. "No, my old friend, not a song. I am not sure I know what it is about." He turned his attention to Perrin. "Young Aiel often travel into the Blight. Some of the young men go alone, thinking for some reason that they have been called to kill the Dark One. Most go in small groups, to hunt Trollocs." Rain shook his head sadly, and when he went on, his voice was heavy. 2 years ago, a band of the people crossing the waste about 100 miles south of the Blight found one of these groups.
It's almost, pretty much.
Hila put in, as sorrowful as her husband. "Little more than girls." Perrin made a surprised sound, and Elias grinned at him wryly. "Young girls don't have to tend house and cook if they don't want to, boy. The ones who want to be warriors instead join one of the warrior societies. Tardarai's Mai, the Maidens of the Spear, and fight right alongside the men." Perrin shook his head. Elias chuckled at his expression. Rain took up the story again, distaste and perplexity mingled in his voice. "The young women were all dead, except one, and she was dying. She crawled to the wagons. It was clear she knew they were Tuatha. Her loathing outweighed her pain, but she had a message so important to her that she must pass it on to someone, even us, before she died. Men went to see if they could help any of the others. There was a trail of her blood to follow, but all were dead, and so were 3 times their number in Trollocs. Elias sat up, his pipe almost falling from between his teeth. 100 miles into the waste? Impossible. Javik Kashar. That's what Trollocs call the waste. The dying ground. They wouldn't go 100 miles into the waste if all the Murdral and the Blight were driving them. You know an awful lot about Trollocs, Elias, Perrin said. Go on with your story, Elias told Rain gruffly. From trophies the Aiel carried, it was obvious they were coming back from the Blight. The Trollocs had followed, but by the tracks only a few lived to return after killing the Aiel. As for the girl, she would not let anyone touch her, even to tend her wounds. But she seized the seeker of that band by his coat. And this is what she said, word for word. Leaf Blighter means to blind the eye of the world, Lost One. He means to slay the great serpent. Warn the people, Lost One. Sightburner comes. Tell them to stand ready for he who comes with the dawn. Tell them. And then she died. Leaf Blighter and Sightburner, Rain added to Perrin, are Aiel names for the Dark One. But I don't understand another word of it. Yet she thought it important enough to approach those she obviously despised, to pass it on with her last breath. But to who? We are ourselves the people, but I hardly think she meant it for us. The Aiel? They would not let us tell them if we tried. He sighed heavily. She called us the Lost. I never knew before how much they loathe us. Ela set her knitting in her lap and touched his head gently. Something they learned in the Blight, Elias mused. But none of it makes sense. Slay the great serpent, kill time itself, and blind the eye of the world? As well say he's going to starve a rock. Maybe she was babbling, Rain. Wounded, dying, she could have lost her grip on what was real. Maybe she didn't even know who those Tuathan were. She knew what she was saying, and to whom she was saying it. Something more important to her than her own life, and we cannot even understand it. When I saw you walking into our camp, I thought perhaps we would find the answer at last, since you were. Elias made a quick motion with his hand, and Rain changed what he had been going to say. Are a friend, and know many strange things. Not about this, Elias said in a tone that put an end to talk. The silence around the campfire was broken only by the music and laughter drifting from other parts of the night-shrouded camp. Lying with his shoulders propped on one of the logs around the fire, Perrin tried puzzling out the Aiel woman's message, but it made no more sense to him than it had to Rain or Elias. The eye of the world. That had been in his dreams more than once, but he did not want to think about those dreams. Elias now. There was a question there he would like answered. What had Rain been about to say about the bearded man, and why had Elias cut him off? He had no luck with that either. He was trying to imagine what Aiel girls were like, going into the Blight where only warders went that he had ever heard, fighting Trollocs. When he heard Egwene coming back, singing to herself. Scrambling to his feet, he went to meet her at the edge of the firelight. She stopped short, looking at him with her head tilted to one side. In the dark, he could not read her expression. You've been gone a long time, he said. Did you have fun? We ate with his mother, she answered, and then we danced and laughed. It seems like forever since I danced. He reminds me of Will Alcine. You always had sense enough not to let Will put you in his pocket. Aram is a gentle boy who is fun to be with, she said in a tight voice. He makes me laugh. Perrin sighed. I'm sorry. I'm glad you had fun dancing. Abruptly, she flung her arms around him, weeping on his shirt. Awkwardly, he patted her hair. Rand would know what to do, he thought. Rand had an easy way with girls. Not like him, who never knew what to do or say. I told you I'm sorry, Egwene. I really am glad you had fun dancing. Really. Tell me they're alive, she mumbled into his chest. What? She pushed back to arm's length, her hands on his arms, and looked up at him in the darkness. Rand and Matt, the others, tell me they are alive. He took a deep breath and looked around uncertainly. They are alive, he said finally. Good. She scrubbed at her cheeks with quick fingers. That is what I wanted to hear. Good night, Perrin. Sleep well. Standing on tiptoe, she brushed a kiss across his cheek and hurried past him before he could speak. He turned to watch her. Hila rose to meet her, and the two women went into the wagon talking quietly. Rand might understand it, he thought, but I don't. In the distant night, the wolves howled the first thin sliver of the new moon toward the horizon, and he shivered. Tomorrow would be time enough to worry about the wolves again. He was wrong. They were waiting to greet him in his dreams. Chapter 26. Whitebridge. The last unsteady note of what had been barely recognizable as the wind that shakes the willow faded mercifully away. Matt lowered Tom's gold and silver-faced flute. Rand took his hands from his ears. A sailor coiling a line on the deck nearby heaved a loud sigh of relief. For a moment, the only sounds were the water lapping against the hull, the rhythmic creak of the oars, and now and again the hum of rigging strummed by the wind. The wind blew dead on to the spray's bow, and the useless sails were furled. I suppose I should thank you, Tom Maryland muttered finally, for teaching me how true the old saying is. Teach him how you will, a pig will never play the flute. The sailor burst out laughing, and Matt raised the flute as if to throw it at him. Deftly, Tom snagged the instrument from Matt's fist and fitted it into its hard leather case. I thought all you shepherds whiled away the time with the flute, playing the pipes or the flute. That would show me to trust what I don't know firsthand. Rand's the shepherd, Matt grumbled. He plays the pipes, not me. Yes, well, he does have a little aptitude. Perhaps we had better work on juggling, boy. At least you show some talent for that. Tom, Rand said, I don't know why you're trying so hard. He glanced at the sailor and lowered his voice. After all, we aren't really trying to become Gleeman. It's only something to hide behind until we find Moraine and the others. Tom tugged at an end of his mustache and seemed to be studying the smooth, brown leather of the flute case on his knees. What if you don't find them, boy? There's nothing to say they're even still alive. They're alive, Rand said firmly. He turned to Matt for support, but Matt's eyebrows were pinched down on his nose, and his mouth was a thin line, and his eyes were fixed on the deck. Well, speak up, Rand told him. You can't be that mad over not being able to play the flute. I can't either, not very well. You never wanted to play the flute before. Matt looked up, still frowning. What if they are dead? He said softly. We have to accept facts, right? At that moment, the lookout in the bow sang out, Whitebridge! Whitebridge ahead! For a long minute, unwilling to believe that Matt could say something like that so casually, Rand held his friend's gaze amid the scrabble of sailors preparing to put in. Matt glowered at him with his head pulled down between his shoulders. There was so much Rand wanted to say, but he could not manage to get it all into words. They had to believe the others were alive. They had to. Why? Nagged a voice in the back of his head. So it will all turn out like one of Tom's stories? The heroes find the treasure and defeat the villain and live happily ever after. Some of his stories don't end that way. Sometimes even heroes die. Are you a hero, Randall Thor? Are you a hero, sheep herder? Abruptly, Matt flushed and pulled his eyes away. Freed from his thoughts, Rand jumped up to move through the hurly-burly to the rail. Matt came after him slowly, not even making an effort to dodge the sailors who ran across his path. Men dashed about the boat, bare feet thumping the deck, hauling on ropes, tying off some lines, and untying others. Some brought up big oil-skinned bags stuffed almost to bursting with wool, while others readied the cables as thick as Rand's wrist. Despite their haste, they moved with the assurance of men who had done it all 1,000 times before. But Captain Doman stumped up and down the deck shouting orders and cursing those who did not move fast enough to suit him. Rand's attention was all for what lay ahead, coming plainly into sight as they rounded a slight bend of the RNL. He had heard of it in song and story and peddler's tales, but now he would actually see the legend. The white bridge arched high over the wide waters, twice as high as the Spray's mast and more. And from end to end, it gleamed milky white in the sunlight, gathering the light until it seemed to glow. Spidery piers of the same stuff plunged into the strong currents, appearing too frail to support the weight and width of the bridge. It looked all of one piece, as if it had been carved from a single stone or molded by a giant's hand, broad and tall, leaping the river with an airy grace that almost made the eye forget its size. All in all, it dwarfed the town that sprawled about its foot on the east bank, though White Bridge was larger by far than Emmons Field, with houses of stone and brick as tall as those in Tarrant Ferry, and wooden docks like thin fingers sticking out into the river. Small boats dotted the RNL thickly, fishermen hauling their nets, and over it, the White Bridge towered and shone. "It looks like glass," Rand said to no one in particular. Captain Doman paused behind them and tucked his thumbs behind his broad belt. "Nay, lad, whatever it be, it no be glass. Never so hard the rains come, it no be slippery, and the best chisel and the strongest arm no make a mark on it." "A remnant from the age of legends," Tom said. "I've always thought it must be." The captain gave a dour grunt. "Mayhap, but still useful despite. Could be someone else built it. Does no have to be Aes Sedai work, fortune prick me. It no has to be so old as all that. Put your back into it, you bloody fool." He hurried off down the deck. Rand stared even more wonderingly. From the age of legends. Made by Aes Sedai then. That was why Captain Doman felt the way he did, for all his talk about the wonder and strangeness of the world. Aes Sedai work. One thing to hear about it, another to see it and touch it. You know that, don't you? For an instant it seemed to Rand that a shadow rippled through the milk-white structure. He pulled his eyes away to the docks coming nearer, but the bridge still loomed in the corner of his vision. "We made it, Tom," he said, then forced a laugh. "And no mutiny." The Gleeman only harumphed and blew out his mustaches, but two sailors readying a cable nearby gave Rand a sharp glance, then bent quickly back to their work. He stopped laughing and tried not to look at the two for the rest of the approach to White Bridge. The Spray curved smoothly in beside the first dock, thick timbers sitting on heavy tar-coated pilings, and stopped with a backing of oars that swirled the water to froth around the blades. As the oars were drawn in, sailors tossed cables to men on the dock who fastened them off with a flourish, while other crewmen slung the bags of wool over the side to protect the hull from the dock pilings. Before the boat was even pulled snug against the dock, carriages appeared at the end of the dock, tall and lacquered, shiny black, each one with a name painted on the door in large letters, gold or scarlet. The carriage's passengers hurried up the gangplank as soon as it dropped in place. Smooth-faced men in long velvet coats and silk-lined cloaks and cloth slippers, each followed by a plainly dressed servant carrying his iron-bound money box. They approached Captain Doman with painted smiles that slipped when he abruptly roared in their faces. "You!" He thrust a thick finger past them, stopping Florin Gelb in his tracks at the length of the boat. The bruise on Gelb's forehead from Rand's boot had faded away, but he still fingered the spot from time to time, as if to remind himself. "You've slept on watch for the last time on my vessel, or on any vessel if I have my way of it. Choose your own side, the dock or the river. But off my vessel now!" Gelb hunched his shoulders and his eyes glittered hate at Rand and his friends. At Rand especially, a poisonous glare. The wiry man looked around the deck for support, but there was little hope in that look. One by one, every man in the crew straightened from what he was doing and stared back coldly. Gelb wilted visibly, but then his glare returned, twice as strong as it had been. With a muttered curse, he darted below to the crew's quarters. Doman sent 2 men after him to see he did no mischief and dismissed him with a grunt. When the captain turned back to them, the merchants took up their smiles and bows as if they had never been interrupted. At a word from Tom, Matt and Rand began gathering their things together. There was not much aside from the clothes on their backs, not for any of them. Rand had his blanket roll and saddlebags and his father's sword. He held the sword for a minute, and homesickness rolled over him so strongly that his eyes stung.
Little cover from that last one I
if he would
did.
ever see Tam again.
But we'll do a couple more tokes off
Going to spend the rest of your life running.
The key lime pie since we did
with a shuddering
the wedding
sigh,
cake
he slipped
before.
the belt around his waist over his coat. Gelb came back on deck, followed by his twin shadows. He looked straight ahead, but Rand could still feel hatred coming off him in waves. Back rigid and face dark, Gelb walked stiff-legged down the gangplank and pushed roughly into the thin crowd on the dock. In a minute, he was gone from sight, vanished beyond the merchants' carriages. There were not a great many people on the dock, and those were a plainly dressed mix of workmen, fishermen mending nets, and a few townspeople who had come out to see the first boat of the year to come downriver from Saldaia. None of the girls was Egwene, and no one looked the least bit like Moraine or Lan, or anyone else Rand was hoping to see. Maybe they didn't come down to the dock, he said. Maybe, Tom replied curtly. He settled his instrument cases on his back with care. You two keep an eye out for Gelb. He will make trouble if he can. We want to pass through Whitebridge so softly that nobody remembers we were here 5 minutes after we're gone. Their cloaks flapped in the wind as they walked to the gangplank. Matt carried his bow crossed in front on his chest. Even after all their days on the boat, it still got a few looks from the crewmen. Their bows were short affairs. Captain Doman left the merchants to intercept Tom at the gangplank. You believe in me now, Gleeman? Can I not talk you into continuing on? I be going all the way down to Ilion, where folk have a proper regard for Gleeman. There be no finer place in the world for your art. I'd get you there in good time for the Feast of Siphon. The competitions, you know. 100 gold
2.
marks for the best telling of the great hunt of the Horn.
I'll be right back.
A great prize, Captain, Tom replied with an elaborate bow and a flourish of his cloak that set the patches to fluttering. And great competitions, which rightly draw Gleeman from the whole world over. But, he added dryly,
Okay, I'll be right back.
We could not afford the fare at the rates you charge. Aye, well, as to that. The captain produced a leather purse from his coat pocket and tossed it to Tom. It clinked when Tom caught it. Your fare's back, and a bit more besides. The damage was not so bad as I thought. And you've worked your way and more with your tails and your harp. I could maybe manage as much again if you stay aboard to the Sea of Storms. And I would set you ashore in Ilion. A good gleeman can make his fortune there, even aside from the competitions. Tom hesitated, weighing the purse on his palm, but Rand spoke up. We're meeting friends here, Captain, and going on to Camelin together. We'll have to see Ilion another time. Tom's mouth twisted wryly. Then he blew out his long mustaches and tucked the purse into his pocket. Perhaps if the people we are to meet are not here, Captain. Aye, Doman said sourly. You think on it. Too bad I can no keep Gelb aboard to take the other's anger, but I do what I say I will do. I suppose I must ease up now, even if it means taking 3 times as long to reach Ilion as I should. Well, mayhap those trollocs were after you 3. Rand blinked but kept silent, but Matt was not so cautious. Why do you think they weren't? He demanded. They were after the same treasure we were hunting? Mayhap, the captain grunted, sounding unconvinced. He combed thick fingers through his beard, then pointed at the pocket where Tom had put the purse. Twice that, if you come back to keep the men's minds off how hard I work them. Think on it. I sail with the first light on the morrow. He turned on his heel and strode back to the merchants, arms spreading wide as he began an apology for keeping them waiting. Tom still hesitated, but Rand hustled him down the gangplank without giving him a chance to argue, and the gleeman let himself be herded. A murmur passed through the people on the dock as they saw Tom's patch-covered cloak, and some called out to discover where he would be performing. So much
key
for not
lime
being
pie one.
noticed, Rand thought, dismayed. By sundown, it would be all over Whitebridge that there was a gleeman in town. He hurried Tom along, though, and Tom, wrapped in sulky silence, did not even try to slow down enough to preen under the attention. The carriage drivers looked down at Tom with interest from their high perches, but apparently the dignity of their positions forbade shouting. With no idea of where to go exactly, Rand turned up the street that ran along the river and under the bridge. "We need to find Moraine and the others," he said, "and fast. We should have thought of changing Tom's cloak." Tom suddenly shook himself and stopped dead. "An innkeeper will be able to tell us if they're here, or if they've passed through. The right innkeeper. Innkeepers have all the news and gossip. If they aren't here..." He looked back and forth from Rand to Matt. "We have to talk, we three." Cloak swirling around his ankles, he set off into the town, away from the river. Rand and Matt had to step quickly to keep up. The broad, milk-white name dominated Whitebridge as much close up as it did from afar. In the streets, he realized that the town was every bit as big as Bearlawn, though not crowded with people. A few carts moved in the streets, pulled by horse or ox or donkey or man, but no carriages. Those most likely all belonged to the natives and were clustered down at the dock. Shops of every description lined the streets. Many tradesmen worked in front of their establishments, with the signs swinging in the wind. They passed a man mending pots and a tailor holding folds of cloth to light for a customer. Sitting in the doorway, tapped his hammer on the heel of a boot.
Go one more.
Hawkers cried their services at sharpening knives and scissors, or tried to interest the passer-by in their skimpy trays of fruit or vegetables. But none was getting much interest. Selling food at the same pitiful rate as Rand remembered from Bearlawn. Even the fishmongers displayed only small piles of small fish for all the fish on the river. Times were not really hard yet, but everyone could see what was coming if it did not change soon. And the faces that were not fixed into worried frowns seemed to stare at something unseen.
That cough kind of hurt my back.
Where the Whitebridge came down in the center of the town was a big square, paved with stones worn by generations of feet and wagon wheels. Inns surrounded the square, and shops, and tall red brick houses with signs out front bearing the same names Rand had seen in the carriages at the dock. It was into one of those inns, seemingly chosen at random, that Tom ducked. The sign over the door, swinging in the wind, had a striding man with a bundle on his back on one side, and the same man with his head on a pillow on the other, and proclaimed, "The Wayfarer's Rest." The common room stood empty except for the fat innkeeper drawing ale from a barrel, and two men in rough workman's clothes, staring glumly into their mugs at a table in the back. Only the innkeeper looked up when they came in. A shoulder-high wall split the room in two from front to back, with tables and a blazing fireplace on each side. Rand wondered idly if all innkeepers were fat and losing their hair. Rubbing his hands together briskly, Tom commented to the innkeeper on the late cold and ordered hot spiced wine, then added quietly, "Is there somewhere my friends and I could talk without being disturbed?" The innkeeper nodded to the low wall. "The other side, that's as best I've got, unless you want to take a room. For when sailors come up from the river, seems like half the crew's got grudges against the other half. I won't have my place broken up by fights, so I keep them apart." He had been eyeing Tom's cloak the whole while, and now he cocked his head to one side, a sly look in his eyes. "You staying? Haven't had a gleeman here in some time. Folks would pay real good for something as would take their minds off things. I'd even take some off on your room and meals." "Unnoticed," Rand thought glumly. "You are too generous," Tom said with a smooth bow. "Perhaps I will take up your offer, but for now, little privacy. I'll bring you wine. Good money here for a gleeman." The tables on the far side of the wall were all empty, but Tom chose one right in the middle of the space. "So no one can listen without us knowing," he explained. "Did you hear that fellow? He'll take some off. Why, I double his custom just by sitting here. Any honest innkeeper gives a gleeman room and board and a good bit besides." The bare table was none too clean, and the floor had not been swept in days, if not weeks. Rand looked around and grimaced. Master Aldir would not have let his inn get that dirty if he had had to climb out of a sickbed to see to it. We're only after information, remember? Why here? Matt demanded. We passed other inns that looked cleaner. Straight on from the bridge, Tom said, is the road to Camelin. Anyone passing through Whitebridge comes through this square, unless they're going by river, and we know your friends aren't doing that. If there is no word of them here, it doesn't exist. Let me do the talking. This has to be done carefully. Just then the innkeeper appeared, 3 battered pewter mugs gripped in one fist by the handles. The fat man flicked at the table with a towel, set the mugs down, and took Tom's money. If you stay, you won't have to pay for your drinks. Good wine here. Tom's smile touched only his mouth. I will think on it, innkeeper. What news is there? We have been away from hearing things. Big news, that's what. Big news. The innkeeper draped the towel over his shoulder and pulled up a chair. He crossed his arms on the table, took root with a long sigh, saying what a comfort it was to get off his feet. His name was Barton, and he went on about his feet in detail, about corns and bunions, and how much time he spent standing, and what he soaked them in, until Tom mentioned the news again, and then he shifted over with hardly a pause. The news was just as big as he said it was. Loghain, the false dragon, had been captured after a big battle near Lugard, while he was trying to move his army from Giladan to Tyr. The prophecies, they understood. Tom nodded. Bartim went on. The roads in the south were packed with people, the lucky ones, with what they could carry on their backs. Thousands fleeing in all directions. None, Bartim chuckled wryly. Supported Loghain, of course. Oh no, you won't find many to admit to that, not now. Just refugees trying to find a safe place during the Troubles. Aes Sedai had been involved in taking Loghain, of course. Bartim spat on the floor when he said that, and again when he said they were taking the false dragon north to Tar Valon. Bartim was a decent man, he said, a respectable man. And Aes Sedai could all go back to the Blight where they came from and take Tar Valon with them, as far as he was concerned. He would get no closer to an Aes Sedai than 1,000 miles if he had his way. Of course, they were stopping at every village and town on the way north to display Loghain, so he had heard. To show people that the false dragon had been taken and the world was safe again. He would have liked to see that, even if it did mean getting close to Aes Sedai. He was halfway tempted to go to Camelin. They'll be taking him there to show to Queen Morghese. The innkeeper touched his forehead respectfully. I've never seen the queen. Man ought to see his own queen, don't you think? Loghain could do things. The way Bartim's eyes shifted and his tongue darted across his lips made it clear what he meant. He had seen the last false dragon 2 years ago when he was paraded through the countryside, but that was just some fellow who thought he could make himself a king. There had been no need for Aes Sedai that time. Soldiers had had him chained up on a wagon, a sullen-looking fellow who moaned in the middle of the wagon bed, covering his head with his arms whenever people threw stones or poked him with sticks. There had been a lot of that, and the soldiers had done nothing to stop it, as long as they did not kill the fellow. Best to let the people see he was nothing special after all. He could not do things. This Loghain would be something to see, though. Something for Bartim to tell his grandchildren about. If only the inn would let him get away. Rand listened with an interest that did not have to be feigned. When Padan Fain had brought word to Emond's Field of a false dragon, a man actually wielding the power, it had been the biggest news to come into the Two Rivers in years. What had happened since had pushed it to the back of his mind. But it was still the sort of thing people would be talking about for years and telling their grandchildren about too. Bartim would probably tell his that he had seen Loghain, whether he did or not. Nobody would ever think what happened to some village folk from the Two Rivers was worth talking about, not unless they were Two Rivers people themselves. That, Tom said, would be something to make a story of. A story they'd tell for 1,000 years. I wish I had been there. He sounded as if it was the simple truth, and Rand thought it really was. I might try to see him anyway. You didn't say what route they were taking. Perhaps there are some travelers around. They might have heard the route. Barton waved a grubby hand dismissively. North, that's all anybody knows around here. You want to see him? Go to Caneland. That's all I know. And if there's anything to know in Whitebridge, I know it. No doubt you do, Tom said smoothly. I expect a lot of strangers passing through stop here. The sign caught my eye from the foot of the Whitebridge. Not just from the west, I'll have you know. 2 days ago, there was a fellow in here, an Ileaner, with a proclamation all done up with seals and ribbons. Read it right out there in the square. Said he's taking it all the way to the Mountains of Mist, maybe even to the Arth Ocean, if the passes are open. Said they've sent men to read it in every land in the world. The innkeeper shook his head. The Mountains of Mist. I hear they're covered with fog all the year round. And there's things in the fog will strip the flesh off your bones before you can run. Matt snickered, earning a sharp look from Barton. Tom leaned forward intently. What did the proclamation say? Why, the hunt for the horn, of course, Barton explained. Didn't I say that? The Ilianers are calling on everybody, as will swear their lives to the hunt, to gather in Ilion. Can you imagine that? Swearing your life to a legend? I suppose they'll find some fools. There's always fools around. This fellow claimed the end of the world is coming. The last battle with the Dark One. He chuckled, but it had a hollow sound. A man laughing to convince himself something really was worth laughing at. Guess they think the Horn of Valir has to be found before it happens. Now what do you think of that? He chewed a knuckle pensively for a minute. Of course, I don't know as I could argue with them after this winter. The winter, and this fellow Loghain, and those other two before as well. Why all these fellows the last few years claiming to be the dragon? And the winter must mean something. What do you think? Tom did not seem to hear him. In a soft voice, the Gleeman began to recite to himself. In the last lone fight, against the fall of long night, the mountains stand guard, and the dead shall be ward, for the grave is no bar to my call. That's it. Barton grinned as if he could already see the crowds handing him their money while they listened to Tom. That's it. The great hunt of the horn. You tell that one, they'll be hanging from the rafters in here. Everybody's heard about the proclamation. Tom still seemed to be 1,000 miles away, so Rand said, We're looking for some friends who are coming this way, from the west. Have there been many strangers passing through in the last week or two? Some, Barton said slowly. There's always some, from east and west both. He looked at each of them in turn, suddenly wary. What do they look like, these friends of yours? Rand opened his mouth, but Tom, abruptly back from wherever he had been, gave him a sharp, silencing look. With an exasperated sigh, the Gleeman turned to the innkeeper. 2 men and 3 women, he said reluctantly. They may be together or maybe not. He gave thumbnail sketches, painting each one in just a few words, enough for anyone who had seen them to recognize without giving away anything about who they were. Barton rubbed one hand over his head, disarranging his thinning hair, and stood up slowly. Forget about performing here, Gleeman. In fact, I'd appreciate it if you drank your wine and left. Leave Whitebridge if you're smart. Someone else has been asking after them. Tom took a drink, as if the answer were the least important thing in the world, and raised an eyebrow at the innkeeper. Who would that be? Barton scrubbed his hand through his hair again, and shifted his feet on the point of walking away, then nodded to himself. About a week ago, as near as I can say, a Weasley fellow came over the bridge. Crazy, everybody thought. Always talking to himself, never stopped moving even when he was standing still. Asked about the same people, some of them. He asked like it was important, then acted like he didn't care what the answer was. Half the time he was saying, as he had to wait here for them, and the other half as he had to go on. He was in a hurry. One minute he was whining and begging, the next making demands like a king. He got himself a thrashing a time or two, crazy or not. The watch almost took him in custody for his own safety. He went off toward Camelin that same day, talking to himself and crying. Crazy, like I said. Rand looked at Tom and Matt questioningly, and they both shook their heads. If this Weasley fellow was looking for them, he was still nobody they recognized. Are you sure it was the same people he wanted? Rand asked. Some of them. The fighting man and the woman in silk. But it wasn't them as he cared about. It was 3 country boys. His eyes slid across Rand and Matt and away again so fast that Rand was not sure if he had really seen the look or imagined it. He was desperate to find them, but crazy, like I said. Rand shivered and wondered who the crazy man could be and why he was looking for them. The dark friend. Would Baalzamon use a madman? He was crazy, but the other one... Bartum's eyes shifted uneasily and his tongue ran over his lips as if he could not find enough spit to moisten them. Next day, the other one came for the first time. He fell silent. The other one? Tom prompted finally. Bartum looked around, although their side of the divided room was still empty except for them. He even raised up on his toes and looked over the low wall. When he finally spoke, it was in a whispered rush. All in black he is. Keeps the hood of his cloak pulled up so you can't see his face, but you can feel him looking at you. Feel it like an icicle shoved into your spine. He spoke to me. He flinched and stopped to chew at his lip before going on. Sounded like a snake crawling through dead leaves. Fair turned my stomach to ice. Every time as he comes back, he asks the same questions. Same questions the crazy man asked. Nobody ever sees him coming. He's just there all of a sudden, day or night, freezing you where you stand. People are starting to look over their shoulders. Worst of it is, the gate tenders claim as he's never passed through any of the gates, coming or going. Rand worked at keeping his face blank. He clenched his jaw until his teeth ached. Matt scowled and Tom studied his wine. The word none of them wanted to say hung in the air between them. Murdral. I think I'd remember if I ever met anyone like that, Tom said after a minute. Bartum's head bobbed furiously. Burn me, but you would. Like's truth, you would. He wants the same lot as the crazy man, only he said as there's a girl with him, and he glanced sideways at Tom.
Hell yeah, fire.
White hair gleaming.
You
Tom's
can't beat
eyebrows shot
that.
up in what Rand was sure was unfeigned
Get to go to a
surprise.
free show
A white hair
and spend time with your kid.
Well,
That makes it even more
in the world
plus.
with a little age on him. I assure you, I don't know this fellow, and he can have no reason to be looking for me. That's as may be, Bartum said glumly. He didn't say it in so many words, but I got the impression as he would be very displeased with anyone who has tried to help these people or tried to hide them from him. Anyway, I'll tell you what I told him. I haven't seen any of them, nor heard tell of them, and that's the truth. Not any of them, he finished pointedly. Abruptly, he slapped Tom's money down on the table. Just finish your wine and go. All right, all right? Then he trundled away as fast as he could, looking over his shoulder. They'd, Matt breathed when the innkeeper was gone. I should have known they'd be looking for us here. And he'll be back, Tom said, leaning across the table and lowering his voice. I say we sneak back to the boat and take Captain Doman up on his offer. The hunt will center on the road to Camelin, while we're on our way to Ilion, 1,000 miles from where the Murdral expect us. No, Rand said firmly. We wait for Moraine and the others in Whitebridge, or we go on to Camelin. One or the other, Tom. That's what we decided. That's crazed, boy. Things have changed. You listen to me. No matter what this innkeeper says, when a Murdral stares at him, he'll tell all about us down to what we had to drink and how much dust we had on our boots. Rand shivered, remembering the Fade's eyeless stare. As for Camelin, you think the Halfmen don't know you want to get to Tarvalon? It's a good time to be on a boat headed south. No, Tom. Rand had to force the words out, thinking of being 1,000 miles from where the Fades were looking, but he took a deep breath and managed to firm his voice. No. Think, boy. Ilion. There isn't a grander city on the face of the earth. And the great Hunt of the Horn. There hasn't been a hunt of the Horn in near 400 years. A whole new cycle of stories waiting to be made. Just think, we never dreamed of anything like it. By the time the Murdral figure out where you've gone to, you'll be old and gray and so tired of watching your grandchildren, you won't care if they do find you. Rand's face took on a stubborn set. How many times do I have to say no? They'll find us wherever we go. There'd be Fades waiting in Ilion, too. And how do we escape the dreams? I want to know what's happening to me, Tom, and why. I'm going to Tarvalon. With Moraine if I can. Without her if I have to. Alone if I have to. I need to know. But Ilion, boy. And a safe way out, downriver, while they're looking for you in another direction. Blood and ashes, a dream can't hurt you. Rand kept silent. A dream can't hurt? The dream thorns draw real blood? He almost wished he had told Tom about that dream, too. Do you dare tell anybody? Balsamon is in your dreams, but what's between dreaming and waking now? Who do you dare to tell that the Dark One is touching you? Tom seemed to understand. The Gleeman's face softened. Even those dreams, lad. They are still just dreams, aren't they? For the light's sake, Matt, talk to him. I know you don't want to go to Tarvalon at least. Matt's face reddened, half embarrassment and half anger. He avoided looking at Rand and scowled at Tom instead. Why are you going to all this fuss and bother? You want to go back to the boat? Go back to the boat. We'll take care of ourselves. The Gleeman's thin shoulders shook with silent laughter, but his voice was anger-tight. You think you know enough about Murdral to escape by yourself, do you? You're ready to walk into Tarvalon alone and hand yourself over to the Amerlin seat? Can you even tell one Aja from another? The light burned me, boy. If you think you can even get to Tarvalon alone, you tell me to go. Go, Matt growled, sliding a hand under his cloak. Rand realized with a shock that he was gripping the dagger from Shadar Logoth, maybe even ready to use it. Raucous laughter broke out on the other side of the low wall dividing the room, and a scornful voice spoke up loudly. Trollocs! Put on a Gleeman's cloak, man. You're drunk. Trollocs! Borderland fables. The words doused anger like a pot of cold water. Even Matt half turned to the wall, eyes widening.
Round 2.
Rand stood just enough to see over the wall, then ducked back down again with a sinking feeling in his stomach. Florin Gelb sat on the other side of the wall, at the table in the back, with the two men who had been there when they came in. They were laughing at him, but they were listening. Barnum was wiping a table that badly needed it, not looking at Gelb and the two men. But he was listening too, scrubbing one spot over and over with his towel, and leaning toward them until he seemed almost ready to fall over. Gelb, Rand whispered as he dropped back into his chair, and the others tensed. Tom swiftly studied their side of the room. On the other side of the wall, the second man's voice chimed in. No, there used to be Trollocs, but they killed them all in the Trolloc Wars. Borderland fables, the first man repeated. It's true, I tell you, Gelb protested loudly. I've been in the Borderlands. I've seen Trollocs, and these were Trollocs as sure as I'm sitting here. Those three claimed the Trollocs were chasing them, but I know better. That's why I wouldn't stay on the spray. I've had my suspicions about Baal Doman for some time, but those three are dark friends for sure. I tell you... Laughter and coarse jokes drowned out the rest of what Gelb had to say. How long, Rand wondered, before the innkeeper heard a description of those three? If he had not already. If he did not just leap to the three strangers he had already seen. The only door from their half of the common room would take them right past Gelb's table. Maybe the boat isn't such a bad idea, Matt muttered, but Tom shook his head. Not anymore. The Gleeman spoke softly and fast. He pulled out the leather purse Captain Doman had given him and hastily divided the money into 3 piles. That story will be all through the town in an hour, whether anybody believes it or not, and the half-men could hear any time. Doman isn't sailing until tomorrow morning. At best, he'll have Trollocs chasing him all the way to Ilion. Well, he's half expecting it for some reason, but that won't do us any good. There's nothing for it but to run, and run hard. Matt quickly stuffed the coins Tom shoved in front of him into his pocket. Rand picked his pile up more slowly. The coin Moraine had given him was not among them. Doman had given an equal weight of silver, but Rand, for some reason he could not fathom, wished he had the Aes Sedai's coin instead. Stuffing the money in his pocket, he looked a question at the gleeman. In case we're separated, Tom explained. We probably won't be, but if it does happen, well, you two will make out all right by yourselves. You're good lads. Just keep clear of Aes Sedai. For your lives. I thought you were staying with us. I am, boy, I am. But they're getting close now, and the light only knows. Well, no matter. It isn't likely anything will happen. Tom paused, looking at Matt. I hope you no longer mind me staying with you, he said dryly. Matt shrugged. He eyed each of them, then shrugged again. I'm just on edge. I can't seem to get rid of it. Every time we stop for a breath, they're there, hunting us. I feel like somebody's staring at the back of my head all the time. What are we going to do? The laughter erupted on the other side of the wall, broken again by Gelb trying loudly to convince the two men that he was telling the truth. How much longer, Rand wondered. Sooner or later, Bartram had to put together Gelb's three and the three of them. Tom eased his chair and rose, but kept his height crouched. No one looking casually toward the wall from the other side could see him. He motioned for them to follow, whispering, "Be very quiet." The windows on either side of the fireplace, on their side of the wall, looked out into an alleyway. Tom studied one of the windows carefully before drawing it up just enough for them to squeeze through. It barely made a sound, nothing that could have been heard 3 feet away over the laughing argument on the other side of the low wall. Once in the alley, Matt started for the street right away, but Tom caught his arm. "Not so fast," the windman told him. "Not till we know what we're doing." Tom lowered the window again, as much as he could from outside, and turned to study the alley. Rand followed Tom's eyes. Except for half a dozen rain barrels against the inn and the next building, a tailor shop, the alley was empty, the hard-packed dirt dry and dusty. "Why are you doing this?" Matt demanded again. "You'd be safer if you left us. Why are you staying with us?" Tom stared at him for a long moment. "I had a nephew, Owen," he said wearily, shrugging out of his cloak. He made a pile of his blanket roll as he talked, carefully setting his cased instruments on top. "My brother's only son, my only living kin. He got in trouble with the Aes Sedai, but I was too busy with other things. I don't know what I could have done, but when I finally tried, it was too late. Owen died 2 years later. You could say Aes Sedai killed him." He straightened up, not looking at them. His voice was still level, but Rand glimpsed tears in his eyes as he turned his head away. Thinking about Owen. Wait here. Still avoiding their eyes, he hurried to the mouth of the alley. He reached it. After one quick look around, he strolled casually into the street and out of sight. Matt half rose to follow, then settled back. "He won't leave these," he said, touching the leather instrument cases. "You believe that story?" Rand squatted patiently beside the rain barrels. "What's the matter with you, Matt? You aren't like this. I haven't heard you laugh in days." "I don't like being hunted like a rabbit," Matt snapped. He sighed, letting his head fall back against the brick wall of the inn. Even like that, he seemed tense. His eyes shifted warily. "Sorry. It's the running, and all these strangers, and just everything. It makes me jumpy. I look at somebody and I can't help wondering if he's going to tell the Fates about it, eat us or rob us or... Light, Rand, doesn't it make you nervous?" Rand laughed, a quick bark in the back of his throat. "I'm too scared to be nervous. What do you think the Aes Sedai did to his nephew?" "I don't know," Rand said uneasily. There was only one kind of trouble that he knew of for a man to get into with Aes Sedai. Not like us, I guess. No, not like us. For a time, they leaned against the wall, not talking. Rand was not sure how long they waited. A few minutes, probably, but it felt like an hour waiting for Tom to come back, waiting for Barton and Gelb to open the window and announce them for dark friends. Then a man turned in at the mouth of the alley, a tall man with the hood of his cloak pulled up to hide his face. A cloak black as night against the light of the street. Rand scrambled to his feet, one hand wrapped around the hilt of Tam's sword so hard that his knuckles hurt. His mouth went dry and no amount of swallowing helped. Matt rose to a crouch with one hand under his cloak. The man came closer, and Rand's throat grew tighter with every step. Abruptly, the man stopped and tossed back his cowl. Rand's knees almost gave way. It was Tom. Well, if you don't recognize me, the Gleeman grinned, I guess it's a good enough disguise for the gates. Tom pushed past them and began transferring things from his patch-covered cloak to his new one so nimbly that Rand could not make out any of them. The new cloak was dark brown, Rand saw now. He drew a deep, ragged breath. His throat still felt as if it were clutched in a fist. Brown, not black. Matt still had his hand under his cloak, and he stared at Tom's back as if he were thinking of using the hidden dagger. Tom glanced up at them, then gave them a sharper look. This is no time to get skittish. Deftly, he began folding his old cloak into a bundle around his instrument, inside out, so the patches were hidden. We'll walk out of here one at a time, just close enough to keep each other in sight. Shouldn't be remembered especially that way. Can't you slouch? He added to Rand. That height of yours is as bad as a banner. He slung the bundle across his back and stood, drawing his hood back up. He looked nothing like a white-haired gleeman. He was just another traveler, a man too poor to afford a horse, much less a carriage. Let's go. We've wasted too much time already. Rand agreed fervently, but even so, he hesitated before stepping out of the alley into the square. None of the sparse scattering of people gave them a second look. Most did not look at them at all. But his shoulders nodded, waiting for the cry of dark friend that could turn ordinary people into a mob bent on murder. He ran his eyes across the open area, over people moving about on their daily business. And when he brought them back, a murdrawl was halfway across the square. Where the fate had come from, he could not begin to guess, but it strode toward the three of them with a slow deadliness, a predator with the prey under its gaze. People shied away from the black-cloaked shape, avoided looking at it. The square began to empty out as people decided they were needed elsewhere. The black cowl froze Rand where he stood. He tried to summon up the void, but it was like fumbling after smoke. The Fate's hidden gaze knifed to his bones and turned his marrow to icicles. Don't look at its face, Tom muttered. His voice shook and cracked, and it sounded as if he were forcing the words out. Like brand new, don't look at its face. Rand tore his eyes away. He almost groaned. It felt like tearing a leech. Where he could still see the murderer coming. A cat, amused at their feeble efforts to escape, until finally it snapped shut. The Fade had halved the distance. We're just going to stand here, he mumbled. We have to run, get away. He could not make his feet move. Matt had the ruby-hilted dagger out at last in a trembling hand. His lips were drawn back from his teeth, a snarl, a practice of fear. Think, Tom stopped to swallow, and went on hoarsely. Think you can outrun it, do you, boy?
Just doing some crafting some weapons on Diablo.
Abruptly, Tom growled.
Or upgrading weapons, should I say.
Got mixed up with you boys. Should never have. He shrugged the bundled Gleeman's cloak off of his back and thrust it into Rand's arms. Take care of that. When I say run, you run and don't stop until you get to Camelin. The Queen's blessing, and in. Remember that, in case... Just remember it. I don't understand, Rand said. The murderer was not 20 paces away now. His feet felt like lead weights. Just remember it, Tom snarled. The Queen's blessing. Now. Run! He gave them a push, one hand on the shoulder of each of them, to get them started, and Rand stumbled away in a lurching run with Matt at his side. Run! Tom sprang into motion too, with a long, wordless roar. Not after them, but toward the murderer. His hands flourished, as if he were performing at his best, and daggers appeared. Rand stopped, but Matt pulled him along. The Fade was just as startled. Its leisurely pace faltered in mid-stride. Its hand swept toward the hilt of the black sword hanging at its waist. But the Gleeman's long legs covered the distance quickly. Tom crashed into the Myrddraal before the black blade was half drawn, and both went down in a thrashing heap. The few people still in the square fled. "Run!" The air in the square flashed an eye-searing blue, and Tom began to scream. But in the middle of the scream, he managed a word. "Run!" Rand obeyed. The Gleeman's screams pursued him. Clutching Tom's bundle to his chest, he ran as hard as he could. Panic spread from the square out through the town as Rand and Matt fled on the crest of a wave of fear. Shopkeepers abandoned their goods as the boys passed. Shutters banged down over storefronts, and frightened faces appeared in the windows of houses, then vanished. People who had not been close enough to see ran through the streets wildly, paying no heed. They bumped into one another, and those who were knocked down scrambled to their feet or were trampled. Whitebridge boiled like a kicked anthill. As he and Matt pounded toward the gates, Rand abruptly remembered what Tom had said about his height. Without slowing down, he crouched as best he could without looking as if he were crouching. But the gates themselves, thick wood bound with black iron straps, stood open. The two gate tenders in steel caps and mail tunics worn over cheap-looking red coats with white collars fingered their halberds and stared uneasily into the town. One of them glanced at Rand and Matt, but they were not the only ones running out of the gates. A steady stream boiled through. Panting men clutching wives, weeping women carrying babes and dragging crying children, pale-faced craftsmen still in their aprons, still heedlessly gripping their tools. There would be no one who could tell which way they had gone, Rand thought as he ran, dazed. Tom. Oh, light save me, Tom. Matt staggered beside him, caught his balance, and they ran until the last of the fleeing people had fallen away, ran until the town and the white bridge were far out of sight behind them. Finally, Rand fell to his knees in the dust, pulling air raggedly into his raw throat with great gulps. The road behind him stretched empty until it was lost to sight among bare trees. Matt plucked at him. "Come on, come on!" Matt panted the words. Sweat and dust streaked his face, and he looked ready to collapse. "We have to keep going." "Tom," Rand said. He tightened his arms around the bundle of Tom's cloak. The instrument cases were hard lumps inside. "Tom, he's dead. You saw, you heard. Light Rand, he's dead." "You think Egwene and Moraine and the rest are dead too. If they're dead, why are the Myrddraal still hunting them? Answer me that." Matt dropped to his knees in the dust beside him. "All right, maybe they are alive. But Tom, you saw. Blood and ashes, Rand. The same thing can happen to us." Rand nodded slowly. The road behind them was still empty. He had been halfway expecting, hoping at least, to see Tom appear, striding along, blowing out his mustaches to tell them how much trouble they were. The Queen's blessing in Camelin. He struggled to his feet and swung Tom's bundle on his back alongside his blanket roll. Matt stared up at him, narrow-eyed and wary. "Let's go," Rand said, and started down the road toward Camelin. He heard Matt muttering, and after a moment, he caught up to Rand. They trudged along the dusty road, heads down and not talking. The wind spawned dust devils that whirled across their path. Sometimes Rand looked back, but the road behind was always empty. Chapter 27. Shelter from the Storm. Perrin fretted over the days spent with the Tuathalan, traveling south and east in a leisurely fashion. The traveling people saw no need to hurry. They never did. The colorful wagons did not roll out of a morning until the sun was well above the horizon, and they stopped as early as mid-afternoon if they came across a congenial spot. The dogs trotted easily alongside the wagons, and often the children did too. They had no difficulty in keeping up. Any suggestion that they might go further, or more quickly, was met with laughter, or perhaps, "Ah, but would you make the poor horses work so hard?" He was surprised that Elias did not share his feelings. Elias would not ride in the wagons. He preferred to walk, sometimes loping along at the head of the column. But he never suggested leaving or pressing on ahead. The strange bearded man in his strange skin clothes was so different from the gentle Tuathaon that he stood out whenever he went among the wagons. Even from across the camp, there was no mistaking Elias for one of the people, and not just because of clothes. Elias moved with the lazy grace of a wolf, only emphasized by his skins and his fur hat, radiating danger as naturally as a fire radiated heat, and the contrast with the traveling people was sharp. Young and old, the people were joyful on their feet. There was no danger in their grace, only delight. Their children darted about, filled with the pure zest of moving, of course, but among the Tuathaon, graybeards and grandmothers too still stepped lightly, their walk a stately dance, no less exuberant for its dignity. All the people seemed on the point of dancing, even when standing still, even during the rare times when there was no music in the camp. Fiddles and flutes, dulcimers and zithers, and drums spun harmony and counterpoint among the wagons at almost any hour, in camp or on the move. Joyous songs, merry songs, laughing songs, sad songs. If someone was awake in the camp, there was usually music. Elias met friendly nods and smiles at every wagon he passed, and a cheerful word at any fire where he paused. This must be the face the people always showed to outsiders. Open, smiling faces. But Perrin had learned that hidden beneath the surface was the wariness of a half-tamed deer. Something deep lay behind the smiles directed at the Emmonsfielders, something that wondered if they were safe, something that faded only slightly over the days. With Elias, the wariness was strong, like deep summer heat shimmering in the air, and it did not fade. When he was not looking, they watched him openly, as if unsure what he was going to do. When he walked across the camp, feet ready for dancing, seemed ready for flight as well. Elias was certainly no more comfortable with their way of the lead than they were with him. His mouth wore a permanent twist when he was around the Tuathaon. It was not quite condescension, and certainly not contempt, but looked as though he would rather be elsewhere than where he was. Almost anywhere else. Yet whenever Perrin brought up leaving, Elias made soothing noises about resting, just for a few days. You had hard days before you met me, Elias said, the third or fourth time he asked. And you'll have harder still ahead, with Trollocs and Halfmen after you, and Aes Sedai for friends. He grinned around a mouthful of Hila's dried apple pie. Perrin still found his yellow-eyed gaze disconcerting, even when he was smiling. Perhaps even more when he was smiling. Smiles seldom touched those hunters' eyes. Elias lounged beside Rain's fire, as usual, refusing to sit on the logs drawn up for the purpose. Don't be in such a bloody hurry to put yourself in Aes Sedai hands. What if the Fades find us? What's to keep them from it if we just sit here waiting? 3 wolves can't hold them off, and the traveling people won't be any help. They won't even defend themselves. The Trollocs will butcher them, and it will be our fault. Anyway, we have to leave them sooner or later. It might as well be sooner. Something tells me to wait. Just a few days. Something. Relax, lad. Take life as it comes. Run when you have to. Fight when you must. Rest when you can. What are you talking about? Something. Have some of this pie. Hila doesn't like me, but she surely feeds me well when I visit. Always good food in the people's camps. What something? Theron demanded. If you know something, you aren't telling the rest of us. Elias frowned at the piece of pie in his hand, then set it down and dusted his hands together. Something, he said finally, with a shrug of his shoulders, as if he did not understand it completely himself. Something tells me it's important to wait. A few more days. I don't get feelings like this often, but when I do, I've learned to trust them. They've saved my life in the past. This time it's different somehow, but it's important. That's clear. If you want to run on, then run on. Not me. That was all he would say, no matter how many times Perrin asked. He lay about, talking with Rain, eating, napping with his hat over his eyes, and refused to discuss leaving. Something told him to wait. Something told him it was important. He would know when it was time to go. Have some pie, lad. Don't batter yourself. Try some of this stew. Relax. Aaron could not make himself relax.
Right back. You want
At night, he wandered among the rainbow wagons, worrying, as much because no one else seemed to see anything to worry about as for any other reason. The Tuatha'an sang and danced, cooked and ate around their campfires, fruits and nuts, berries and vegetables. They ate no meat. They went about a myriad domestic chores as if they had not a care in the world. The children ran and played everywhere, hide and seek among the wagons, climbing in the trees around the camp, laughing and rolling on the ground with the dogs. Not a care in the world for anyone. Watching them, he itched to get away. Go before we bring the hunters down on them. They took us in, and we repay their kindness by endangering them. At least they have reason to be lighthearted. Nothing is hunting them. The rest of us. It was hard to get a word with Egwene. Either she was talking with Ela, their heads together in a way that said no men were welcome, or she was dancing with Aaron, swinging around and round to the flutes and fiddles and drums, to the tunes the Tuatha'an had gathered from all over the world, or to the sharp, trilling songs of the traveling people themselves. Sharp, whether they were quick or slow. They knew many songs, some he recognized from home, though often under different names than they were called in the Two Rivers. 3 Girls in the Meadow, for instance, the Tinkers named Pretty Maids Dancing, and they said the wind from the north was called Hard Rain Falling in some lands, Baron's Retreat in others. When he asked, not thinking, for the Tinker has my pots, they fell all over themselves laughing. They knew it, but as toss the feathers. He could understand wanting to dance to the people's songs. Back in Emmons Field, no one considered him more than an adequate dancer, but these songs tugged at his feet, and he thought he had never danced so long or so hard or so well in his life. Hypnotic, they made his blood pound in rhythm to the drums. It was the second evening when, for the first time, Perrin saw women dance to some of the slow songs. The fires burned low, the night hung close around the wagons, and fingers tapped a slow rhythm on the drums. First one drum, then another, until every drum in the camp kept the same low, insistent beat. There was silence except for the drums. A girl in a red dress swayed into the light, loosening her shawl. Strings of beads hung in her hair, and she had kicked off her shoes. A flute began the melody, wailing softly, and the girl danced. Outstretched arms spread her shawl behind her. Her hips undulated as her bare feet shuffled to the beat of the drums. The girl's dark eyes fastened on Perrin, and her smile was as slow as her dance. She turned in small circles, smiling over her shoulder at him. He swallowed hard. The heat in his face was not from the fire. A second girl joined the first, the fringe on their shawls shaking in time to the drums and the slow rotation of their hips. They smiled at him. He cleared his throat hoarsely. He was afraid to look around. His face was as red as a beet, and anyone who was not watching the dancers was probably laughing at him. He was sure of it. As casually as he could manage, he slid off the log as if he were just getting comfortable. But he carefully ended up looking away from the fire, away from the dancers. There was nothing like that in Emmons Field.
You gotta relight it. I was paying too much attention to the game instead of this.
For once, he wished the wind would pick up to cool him off. The girls danced into his field of view again, only now they were 3. One gave him a sly wink. His eyes darted frantically. Light, he thought. What do I do now? Oh, Rand did. He knows about girls. The dancing girls laughed softly. Beads clicked as they tossed their long hair on their shoulders, and he thought his face would burn up. Then a slightly older woman joined the girls to show them how it was done. With a groan, he gave up altogether and shut his eyes. Even behind his eyelids, their laughter taunted and tickled. Even behind his eyelids, he could still see them. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and he wished for the wind. According to Rain, the girls did not dance that dance often, and the women rarely did. And according to Elias, it was thanks to Perrin's blushes that they did so every night thereafter. I have to thank you, Elias told him, his tone sober and solemn. It's different with you young fellows, but at my age it takes more than a fire to warm my bones. Perrin scowled. There was something about Elias's back as he walked away that said even if nothing showed, he was laughing inside. Baron soon learned better than to look away from the dancing women and girls, though the winks and smiles still made him wish he could. One would have been all right, maybe, but 5 or 6, with everyone watching? He never did entirely conquer his blushes. Then Egwene began learning the dance. 2 of the girls who had danced that first night taught her, flapping the rhythm while she repeated the shuffling steps with a borrowed shawl swaying behind her. Baron started to say something, then decided it was wiser not to crack his teeth. When the girls added the hip movements, Egwene started laughing, and the 3 girls fell giggling into one another's arms. But Egwene persevered, with her eyes glistening and bright spots of color in her cheeks. Aram watched her dancing with a hot, hungry gaze. The handsome young Tuathalan had given her a string of blue beads that she wore all the time. Worried frowns now replaced the smiles Ela had worn when she first noticed her grandson's interest in Egwene. Baron resolved to keep a close eye on young Master Aram. Once he managed to get Egwene alone beside a wagon painted in green and yellow. "Enjoying yourself, aren't you?" he said. "Why shouldn't I?" She fingered the blue beads around her neck, smiling at them. "We don't all have to work at being miserable the way you do. Don't we deserve a little chance to enjoy ourselves?" Aram stood not far off. He never got far from Egwene. With his arms folded across his chest, a little smile on his face, half smugness and half challenge. Baron lowered his voice. "I thought you wanted to get to Tar Valon. You won't learn to be an Aes Sedai here." Egwene tossed her head. "And I thought you didn't like me wanting to become an Aes Sedai," she said, too sweetly. "Blood and ashes. Do you believe we're safe here? Are these people safe with us here? A fate could find us any time." Her hand trembled in the beads. She lowered it and took a deep breath. "Whatever is going to happen will happen, whether we leave today or next week. That's what I believe now. Enjoy yourself, Baron. It might be the last chance we have." She brushed his cheek sadly with her fingers. Then Aram held out his hand to her, and she darted to him, already laughing again. As they ran away to where fiddles sang, Aram flashed a triumphant grin over his shoulder at Baron, as if to say, "She is not yours, but she will be mine." They were all falling too much under the spell of the people, Baron thought. Elias is right. You don't have to try to convert you to the way of the leaf. It seeps into you. Ela had taken one look at him huddling out of the wind, then produced a thick wool cloak out of her wagon. A dark green cloak, he was pleased to see, after all the reds and yellows. As he swung it round his shoulders, thinking what a wonder it was that the cloak was big enough for him, Ela said primly, "It could fit better." She glanced at the axe at his belt. When she looked up at him, her eyes were sad above her smile. "It could fit much better." All the Tinkers did that. Their smiles never slipped. There was never any hesitation in their invitations to join them for a drink or to listen to the music, but their eyes always touched the axe, and he could feel what they thought. A tool of violence. There is never any excuse for violence to another human being. The way of the leaf. Sometimes he wanted to shout at them. There were Trollocs in the world, and Fades. There were those who would cut down every leaf. The Dark One was out there, and the way of the leaf would burn in Balzamun's eyes. Stubbornly, he continued to wear the axe. He took to keeping his cloak thrown back, even when it was windy, so the half-moon blade was never hidden. Now and again, Elias looked quizzically at the weapon, hanging heavy at his side, and grinned at him, those yellow eyes seeming to read his mind.
Tangle 2
That
down.
almost made him cover the axe. Almost. If the Tuathalan camp was a source of constant irritation, at least his dreams were normal there. Sometimes he woke up sweating from a dream of Trollocs and Fades storming into the camp, rainbow-colored wagons turning to bonfires from hurled torches, people falling in pools of blood, men and women and children who ran and screamed and died but made no effort to defend themselves against slashing, scythe-like swords. Night after night, he bolted upright in the dark, panting and reaching for his axe before he realized the wagons were not in flames, that no bloody-muzzled shapes snarled over torn and twisted bodies littering the ground. But those were ordinary nightmares, oddly comforting in their way. If there was ever a place for the Dark One to be in his dreams, it was in those, but he was not. No Baalzamon, just ordinary nightmares. He was aware of the wolves, though, when he was awake. They kept their distance from the camps and from the caravan on the move, but he always knew where they were. He could feel their contempt for the dogs guarding a Tuatha. Noisy beasts who had forgotten what their jaws were for had forgotten the taste of warm blood. They might frighten humans, but they would slink away on their bellies if the pack ever came. Each day his awareness was sharper, more clear. Dapple grew more impatient with every sunset. That Elias wanted to do this thing of taking the humans south made it worth doing. But if it must be done, then let it be done. Let this slow travel end. Wolves were meant to roam, and she did not like being away from the pack so long. Impatience burned in wind, too. Hunting was worse than poor here, and he despised living on field mice, something for cubs to stalk while learning to hunt. Fit food for the old, no longer able to pull down a deer or hamstring a wild ox. Sometimes Wynn thought that Byrne had been right. Leave human troubles to humans. But he was wary of such thoughts when Dapple was around, and even more so around Hopper. Hopper was a scarred and grizzled fighter, impassive with the knowledge of years, with guile that more than made up for anything of which age might have robbed him. For humans he cared nothing, but Dapple wished this thing done, and Hopper would wait as she waited, and run as she ran. Wolf or man, bull or bear, whatever challenged Dapple would find Hopper's jaws waiting to send them to the long sleep. That was the whole of life for Hopper. That kept Wynn cautious, and Dapple seemed to ignore the thoughts of both. All of it was clear in Perrin's mind. Fervently he wished for Caemlyn, for Moraine and Tarvalon. Even if there were no answers, there could be an end to it. Elias looked at him, and he was sure the yellow-eyed man knew. Please let there be an end. The dream began more pleasantly than most he had of late. He was at Osbeth Luhan's kitchen table, sharpening his axe with a stone. Mistress Luhan never allowed forge work or anything that smacked of it to be brought into the house. Master Luhan even had to take her knives outside to sharpen them. But she tended her cooking and never said a word about the axe. She did not even say anything when a wolf entered from deeper in the house and curled up between Perrin and the door to the yard. Perrin went on sharpening. It would be time to use it soon. Abruptly, the wolf rose, rumbling deep in its throat, a thick ruff of fur on its neck rising. Baalzamon stepped into the kitchen from the yard. Mistress Luhan went on with her cooking. Perrin scrambled to his feet, raising the axe, but Baalzamon ignored the weapon, concentrating on the wolf instead. Blame the dance where his eyes should be. Is this what you have to protect you? Well, I have faced this before. Many times before. He crooked a finger and the wolf howled as fire burned out of its eyes and ears and mouth, out of its skin. The stench of burned meat and hair filled the kitchen. Osbeth Luhan lifted the lid on a pot and stirred with a wooden spoon. Perrin dropped the axe and jumped forward, trying to beat out the flames with his hands. The wolf crumpled to black ash between his palms. Staring at the shapeless pile of char on Mistress Luhan's clean-swept floor, he backed away. He wished he could wipe the greasy soot from his hands, but the thought of scrubbing it off on his clothes turned his stomach. He snatched up the axe, gripping the haft until his knuckles cracked. Leave me alone, he shouted. Mistress Luhan tapped the spoon in the rim of the pot and replaced the lid, humming to herself. You cannot run from me, Baalzamon said. You cannot hide from me. If you are the one, you are mine. The heat from the fires of his face forced Perrin across the kitchen until his back came up against the wall. Mistress Luhan opened the oven to check her bread. The eye of the world will consume you, Baalzamon said. I mark you mine. He flung out his clenched hand as if throwing something. When his fingers opened, a raven streaked at Perrin's face. Perrin screamed as the black beak pierced his left eye and sat up, touching his face, surrounded by the sleeping wagons of the traveling people. Slowly, he lowered his hands. There was no pain, no blood, but he could remember it. Remember the stabbing agony. He shuddered, and suddenly Elias was squatting beside him in the pre-dawn, one hand outstretched as if to shake him awake. Beyond the trees where the wagons were and the wolves howled, one sharp cry from three throats. He shared their sensations. Fire, pain, fire, hate, hate, kill. Yes, Elias said softly. It is time. Get up, boy. It's time for us to go. Perrin scrambled out of his blankets. While he was still bundling his blanket roll, Rain came out of his wagon, rubbing sleep from his eyes. The Seeker glanced at the sky and froze halfway down the steps, his hands still raised to his face. Only his eyes moved as he studied the sky intently, though Perrin could not understand what he was looking at. A few clouds hung in the east, undersides streaked with pink from the sun yet to rise, but there was nothing else to see. Rain seemed to listen as well and smell the air, but there was no sound except the wind in the trees and no smell but the faint, smoky remnant of last night's campfires. Elias returned with his own scanty belongings, and Rain came the rest of the way down. We must change the direction we travel, my old friend. The Seeker looked uneasily at the sky again. We go another way this day. Will you be coming with us? Elias shook his head, and Rain nodded as if he had known all along. Well, take care, my old friend. There is something about today. He started to look up once more, but pulled his eyes back down before they rose above the wagon tops. I think the wagons will go east, perhaps all the way to the spine of the world. Perhaps we'll find a steading and stay there a while. Trouble never enters the steading, Elias agreed, but the Ogier are none too open to strangers. Everyone is open to the traveling people, Rain said, and grinned. Besides, even Ogier have pots and things to mend. Come, let us have some breakfast and we'll talk about it. No time, Elias said. We move on today too, as soon as possible. It's a day for moving, it seems. Rain tried to convince him to at least stay long enough for food, and when Hila appeared from the wagon with Egwene, she added her arguments, though not as strenuously as her husband. She said all of the right words, but her politeness was stiff, and it was plain she would be glad to see Elias's back, if not Egwene's. Egwene did not notice the regretful sidelong looks Hila gave her. She asked what was going on, and Perrin prepared himself for her to say she wanted to stay with the Tuathalan. But when Elias explained, she only nodded thoughtfully and hurried back into the wagon to gather her things. Finally, Rain threw up his hands. All right. I don't know that I have ever let a visitor leave this camp without a farewell feast, but... Uncertainly, his eyes raised toward the sky again. Well, we need an early start ourselves, I think. Perhaps we will eat as we journey. But at least let everyone say goodbye. Elias started to protest, but Rain was already hurrying from wagon to wagon, pounding on the doors where there was no one awake. By the time a tinker came, leading Bella, the whole camp had turned out in their finest and brightest, a mass of color that made Rain and Hila's red and yellow wagon seem almost plain. The big dogs strolled through the crowd with their tongues lolling out of their mouths, looking for someone to scratch their ears, while Perrin and the others endured handshake after handshake and hug after hug. The girls who had danced every night would not be content with shaking hands, and their hugs made Perrin suddenly wish he was not leaving after all, until he remembered how many others were watching, and then his face almost matched the Seeker's wagon. Aram drew Egwene a little aside. Perrin could not hear what he had to say to her over the noise of goodbyes, but she kept shaking her head, slowly at first, then more firmly as he began to gesture pleadingly. His face shifted from pleading to arguing, but she continued to shake her head stubbornly until Hila rescued her with a few sharp words to her grandson. Scowling, Aram pushed away through the crowd, abandoning the rest of the farewell. Hila watched him go, hesitating on the point of calling him back. She's relieved. Relieved he doesn't want to go with her. Wayne. When he had shaken every hand in the camp at least once and hugged every girl at least twice, the crowd moved back, opening a little space around Rain and Hila, the three visitors. You okay, Miss? Rain intoned, bowing formally, hands on his chest. Depart now in peace. Always will our fires welcome you in peace. The way of the leaf is peace. Peace be on you always, Elias replied, and on all the people. He hesitated, then added, I will find the song, or another will find the song, but the song will be sung, this year or in a year to come. As it once was, so shall it be again, world without end. Rain blinked in surprise, and Hila looked completely flabbergasted, but all the other Tuathawan murmured in reply, world without end, world and time without end. Rain and his wife hurriedly said the same after everyone else. Then it really was time to go. A few last farewells, a few last admonitions to take care, a few last smiles and winks. They were making their way out of the camp. Rain accompanied them as far as the edge of the trees, a pair of the dogs cavorting by his side. Truly, my old friend, you must take care. This day, there is wickedness loose in the world, I fear. And whatever you pretend, you are not so wicked that it will not gobble you up. Peace be on you, Elias said. And on you, Rain said sadly. When Rain was gone, Elias scowled at finding the other two looking at him. So I don't believe in their fool song, he growled. No need to make them feel bad by messing up their ceremony, was there? I told you they set a store by ceremony sometimes. Of course, Egwene said gently. No need at all. Elias turned away, muttering to himself. Dapple, Wind, and Hopper came to greet Elias, not frolicking as the dogs had done, but a dignified meeting of equals. Baron caught what passed between them. Fire eyes, pain, heart fang, death, heart fang. Baron knew what they meant. The Dark One, telling about his dream, their dream. He shivered as the wolves ranged out ahead, scouting the way. It was Egwene's turn to ride Bella, and he walked beside her. Elias led, as usual, a steady, ground-eating pace. Baron did not want to think about his dream. He had thought that the wolves made them saved. Not complete, except full heart, full mind. You will struggle, only complete when you accept. He forced the wolves out of his head and blinked in surprise. He had not known he could do that. He determined not to let them back in again, even in dreams. He was not sure if the thought was his or theirs. Egwene still wore the string of blue beads Aram had given her, and a little sprig of something with tiny, bright red leaves in her hair, another gift from the young Tuathawan. That Aram had tried to talk her into staying with the traveling people, Perrin was sure. He was glad she had not given in, but he wished she did not finger the beads so fondly. Finally, he said, What did you spend so much time talking about with Hila? If you weren't dancing with that long-legged fellow, you were talking to her like it was some kind of secret. Hila was giving me advice on being a woman, Egwene replied absently. He began laughing, and she gave him a hooded, dangerous look that he failed to see. Advice? Nobody tells us how to be men. We just are. That, Egwene said, is probably why you make such a bad job of it. Up ahead, Elias cackled loudly.
Chapter 28. Footprints in Air. Nynaeve stared in wonder at what lay ahead down the river, the white bridge gleaming in the sun with a milky glow. Another legend, she thought, glancing at the warder and the Aes Sedai riding just ahead of her. Another legend, and they don't even seem to notice. She resolved not to stare where they could see. They'll laugh if they see me gaping like a country bumpkin. The three rode on silently toward the fabled white bridge. Since that morning after Shadar Logoth, when she had found Moiraine and Lan on the bank of the Arenelle, there had been little in the way of real conversation between her and the Aes Sedai. There had been talk, of course, but nothing of substance as Nynaeve saw it. Moiraine's attempts to talk her into going to Tar Valon, for instance. Tar Valon. She would go there if need be and take their training, but not for the reasons the Aes Sedai thought. If Moiraine had brought harm to Egwene and the boys, sometimes against her will, Nynaeve had found herself thinking of what a wisdom could do with the one power, of what she could do. Whenever she realized what was in her head, though, a flash of anger burned it out. The power was a filthy thing. She would have nothing to do with it, unless she had to. The cursed woman only wanted to talk about taking her to Tar Valon for training. Moiraine would not tell her anything. It was not as if she wanted to know so much. How do you mean to find them? She remembered demanding. As I have told you, Moiraine replied, without bothering to look back at her. I will know when I am close to the two who have lost their coins. It was not the first time Nynaeve had asked, but the Aes Sedai's voice was like a still pond that refused to ripple, no matter how many stones Nynaeve threw. It made the wisdom's blood boil every time she was exposed to it. Moiraine went on as if she could not feel Nynaeve's eyes on her back. Nynaeve knew she must be able to, she was staring so hard. The longer it takes, the closer I must come, but I will know. As for the one who still has his token, so long as he has it in his possession, I can follow him across half the world if need be. And then? What do you plan when you've found them, Aes Sedai? She did not for a minute believe the Aes Sedai would be so intent on finding them if she did not have plans. Tar Valon wisdom. Tar Valon. Tar Valon. That's all you ever say, and I am becoming part of the training you will receive in Tar Valon wisdom. Will teach you to control your temper. You can do nothing with the one power when emotion rules your mind. Nynaeve opened her mouth, but the Aes Sedai went right on. Lan, I must speak with you a moment. The two put their heads together, and Nynaeve was left with a sullen glower that she hated every time she realized it was on her face. It came too often as the Aes Sedai deftly turned her questions off onto another subject, slayed easily by her conversational traps, or ignored her shouts until they ended in silence. The scowl made her feel like a girl who had been caught acting the fool by someone in the women's circle. That was a feeling Nynaeve was not used to, and the calm smile on Moiraine's face only made it worse. If only there was some way to get rid of the woman. Lan would be better by himself. A warder should be able to handle what was needed, she told herself hastily, feeling a sudden flush. No other reason, but one meant the other. And yet, Lan made her even more furious than Moiraine. She could not understand how he managed to get under her skin so easily. He rarely said anything, sometimes not a dozen words in a day, and he never took part in any of the discussions with Moiraine. He was often apart from the two women, scouting the land, but even when he was there, he kept a little to one side, watching them as if watching a duel. Nynaeve wished he would stop. If it was a duel, she had not managed to score once, and Moiraine did not even seem to realize she was in a fight. Nynaeve could have done without his cool blue eyes, without even a silent audience. That had been the way of their journey for the most part. Quiet, except when her temper got the best of her, and sometimes when she shouted, the sound of her voice seemed to crash in the silence like breaking glass. The land itself was quiet, as if the world were pausing to catch its breath. The wind moaned in the trees, but all else was still. The wind seemed distant, too, even when it was cutting through the cloak on her back. At first the silence was restful after everything that had happened. It seemed as if she had not known a moment of quiet since before winter night. By the end of the first day alone with the Aes Sedai and the warder, though, she was looking over her shoulder and fidgeting in her saddle, as if she had an itch in the middle of her back where she could not reach. The silence seemed like crystal doomed to shatter, and waiting for the first crack put her teeth on edge. It weighed on Moiraine and Lan, too, as outwardly unperturbable as they were. She soon realized that beneath their calm surfaces, hour by hour they wound tighter and tighter, like clock springs being forced to the breaking point. Moiraine seemed to listen to things that were not there, and what she heard put a crease in her forehead. Lan watched the forest and the river as if the leafless trees and wide, slow water carried the signs of traps and ambushes waiting ahead. Part of her was glad that she was not the only one who apprehended that poised on the brink feel to the world. But if it affected them, it was real, and another part of her wanted nothing so much as for it to be just her imagination. Something of it tickled the corners of her mind, as when she listened to the wind. But now she knew that that had to do with the One power, and she could not bring herself to embrace those ripples at the edge of thought. It is nothing, Lan said quietly when she asked. He did not look at her while he spoke. His eyes never ceased their scanning. Then, contradicting what he had just said, he added, You should go back to your 2 rivers when we reach Whitebridge and the Camelin Road. It's too dangerous here. Nothing will try to stop you going back, though. It was the longest speech he had made all that day. She is part of the pattern, Lan, Moiraine said chidingly. Her gaze was elsewhere, too. It is the Dark One, Nynaeve. The storm has left us, for a time at least. She raised one hand as though feeling the air, then scrubbed it on her dress unconsciously as if she had touched filth. He is still watching, however, she sighed, and his gaze is stronger. Not on us, but on the world. How much longer before he is strong enough to... Nynaeve hunched her shoulders. Suddenly she could almost feel someone staring at her back. It was one explanation she would just as soon the Aes Sedai had not given her. Lan scouted their path down the river, but where before he had chosen the way, now Moiraine did so, as surely as if she followed some unseen track, footprints in air, the scent of memory. Lan only checked the route she intended to see that it was safe. Nynaeve had the feeling that even if he said it was not, Moiraine would insist on it anyway, and he would go, she was sure, straight down the river to... With a start, Nynaeve pulled out of her thoughts. They were at the foot of the white bridge. The pale arch shone in the sunlight, a milky spider web too delicate to stand, sweeping across the Arenal. The weight of a man would bring it crashing down, much less that of a horse. Surely it would collapse under its own weight any minute. Lan and Moiraine rode unconcernedly ahead, up the gleaming white approach and onto the bridge, hooves ringing, not like steel on glass, but like steel on steel. The surface of the bridge certainly looked as slick as glass, wet glass, but it gave the horses a firm, sure footing. Nynaeve made herself follow, but from the first step she half waited for the entire structure to shatter under them. If lace were made of glass, she thought, it would look like this. It was not until they were almost all the way across that she noted the tarry smell of char. In a moment she saw. Around the square at the foot of the white bridge, piles of blackened timbers, still leaking smoky threads, replaced half-dozen buildings. Men in poorly fitting red uniforms and tarnished armor patrolled the streets, but they marched quickly, as if afraid of finding anything, and they looked over their shoulders as they went. Townspeople, the few who were out, almost ran, shoulders hunched, as though something were chasing them. Lan looked grim, even for him, and people walked wide of the 3 of them, even the soldiers. The warder sniffed the air and grimaced, growling under his breath. It was no wonder to Nynaeve, with the stink of burn so strong. The wheel weaves as the wheel wills, Moiraine mumbled. No eye can see the pattern until it is woven. In the next moment she was down off Aldib and speaking to townsfolk. She did not ask questions, she gave sympathy, and to Nynaeve's surprise it appeared genuine. People who shied away from Lan, ready to hurry from any stranger, stopped to speak with Moiraine. They appeared startled themselves at what they were doing, but they opened up after a fashion, under Moiraine's clear gaze and soothing voice. The Aes Sedai's eyes seemed to share the people's hurt, to empathize with their confusion, and tongues loosened. They still lied, though, most of them. Some denied there had been any trouble at all. Nothing at all. Moiraine mentioned the burned buildings all around the square. Everything was fine, they insisted, staring past what they did not want to see. One fat fellow spoke with a hollow heartiness, but his cheek twitched at every noise behind him. With a grin that kept slipping, he claimed an overturned lamp had started a fire that spread with the wind before anything could be done. One glance showed Nynaeve that no burned structure stood alongside another. There were almost as many different stories as there were people. Several women lowered their voices conspiratorially. The truth of the matter was there was a man somewhere in the town meddling with the One Power. It was time to have the Aes Sedai in. Pastime was the way they saw it, no matter what the men said about Tar Valon. Let the Red Aja settle matters. One man claimed it had been an attack by bandits, and another said a riot by dark friends. Those ones going to see the false dragon, he confided darkly. They're all over the place. Dark friends, everyone. Still others spoke of some kind of trouble. They were vague about exactly what kind, that had come down river on a boat. We showed them, a narrow-faced man muttered, scrubbing his hands together nervously. Let them keep that kind of thing in the borderlands where it belongs. We went down to the docks and... He cut off so abruptly his teeth clicked. Without another word, he scurried off, peering back over his shoulder at them as if he thought they might chase him down. The boat had gotten away. That much was clear eventually from others, cutting its moorings and fleeing downriver only the day before while a mob poured onto the docks. Nynaeve wondered if Egwene and the boys had been on board. One woman said that a gleeman had been on the boat. If that had been Tom Merrilin. She tried her opinion on Moiraine, that some of the Emmons Fielders might have fled on the boat. The Aes Sedai listened patiently, nodding until she was done. Perhaps, Moiraine said then, but she sounded doubtful. An inn still stood in the square, the common room divided in two by a shoulder-high wall. Moiraine paused as she stepped into the inn, feeling the air with her hand. She smiled at whatever it was she felt, but she would say nothing of it then. Their meal was consumed in silence. Silence not only at their table, but throughout the common room. The handful of people eating there concentrated on their own plates and their own thoughts. The innkeeper, dusting tables with a corner of his apron, muttered to himself continually, but always too low to be heard. Nynaeve thought it would not be pleasant sleeping there. Even the air was heavy with fear. About the time they pushed their plates away, wiped clean with the last scraps of bread, one of the red-uniformed soldiers appeared in the doorway. He seemed resplendent to Nynaeve in his peaked helmet and burnished breastplate, until he took a pose just inside the door, with a hand resting on the hilt of his sword and a stern look on his face, and used a finger to ease his too-tight collar. It made her think of Sen Bui trying to act the way a village councilor should. Lan spared him one glance and snorted, "Militia. Useless." The soldier looked over the room, letting his eyes come to rest on them. He hesitated, then took a deep breath before stomping over to demand, all in a rush, who they were, what their business was in Whitebridge, and how long they intended to stay. "We are leaving as soon as I finish my ale," Lan said. He took another slow swallow before looking up at the soldier. "The light illumine good Queen Morgaze." The red-uniformed man opened his mouth, then took a good look at Lan's eyes and stepped back. He caught himself immediately with a glance at Moiraine and her. She thought for a moment that he was going to do something foolish to keep from looking the coward in front of two women. In her experience, men were often idiots that way. But too much had happened in Whitebridge. Too much uncertainty had escaped from the cellars of men's minds. The militiaman looked back at Lan and reconsidered once more. The warder's hard-planed face was expressionless, but there were those cold blue eyes. So cold. The militiaman settled on a brisk nod. "See that you do. Too many strangers around these days for the good of the Queen's peace." Turning on his heel, he stomped out again, practicing his stern look on the way. None of the locals in the inn seemed to notice. "Where are we going?" Nynaeve demanded of the warder. The mood in the room was such that she kept her voice low, but she made sure it was firm, too. "After the boat?" Lan looked at Moiraine, who shook her head slightly and said, "First I must find the one I can be sure of finding, and at present he is somewhere to the north of us. I do not think the other two went with the boat in any case." A small, satisfied smile touched her lips. "They were in this room, perhaps a day ago, no more than 2. Afraid, but they left alive. The trace would not have lasted without that strong emotion." "Which 2?" Nynaeve leaned over the table intently. Do you know? The Aes Sedai shook her head, the slightest of motions, and Nynaeve settled back. If they're only a day or two ahead, why don't we go after them first? I know they were here, Moiraine said in that insufferably calm voice. But beyond that, I cannot say if they went east or north or south. I trust they are smart enough to have gone east, toward Camelin, but I do not know, and lacking their tokens, I will not know where they are until I am perhaps within half a mile. In 2 days, they could have gone 20 miles or 40 in any direction if fear urged them, and they were certainly afraid when they left here. But wisdom, however fearful they were, in whatever direction they ran, eventually they will remember Camelin, and it is there I will find them. But I will help the one I can find now first. Nynaeve opened her mouth again, but Lan cut her off in a soft voice. They had reason to be afraid. He looked around, then lowered his voice. There was a halfling here. He grimaced the way he had in the square. I can still smell him everywhere. Moiraine sighed. I will keep hope until I know it is gone. I refuse to believe the Dark One can win so easily. I will find all three of them alive and well. I must believe it. I want to find the boys too, Nynaeve said. But what about Egwene? You never even mention her, and you ignore me when I ask. I thought you were going to take her off to... She glanced at the other tables and lowered her voice. To Tarvala. The Aes Sedai studied the tabletop for a moment before raising her eyes to Nynaeve's, and when she did, Nynaeve started back from a flash of anger that seemed almost to make Moiraine's eyes glow. Then her back stiffened, her own anger rising. But before she could say a word, the Aes Sedai spoke coolly. I hope to find Egwene alive and well, too. I do not easily give up young women with that much ability once I have found them, but it will be as the wheel weaves. Nynaeve felt a cold ball in the pit of her stomach. Am I one of those young women you won't give up? We'll see about that, Aes Sedai. The light burn you, we'll see about that. The meal was finished in silence, and it was a silent three who rode through the gates and down the Camelin Road. Moiraine's eyes searched the horizon to the northeast. Behind them, the smoke-stained town of Whitebridge cowered.
Chapter 29. Eyes Without Pity. Elias pushed for speed across the brown grass flatland as if trying to make up for the time spent with the traveling people, setting a pace southward that had even Bella grateful to stop when twilight deepened. Despite his desire for haste, though, he took precautions he had not taken before. At night they had a fire only if there was dead wood already on the ground. He would not let them break so much as a twig off of a standing tree. The fires he made were small and always hidden in a pit carefully dug where he had cut away a plug of sod. As soon as their meal was prepared, he buried the coals and replaced the plug. Before they set out again in the gray false dawn, he went over the campsite inch by inch to make sure there was no sign that anyone had ever been there. He even righted overturned rocks and straightened bent-down weeds. He did it quickly, never taking more than a few minutes, but they did not leave until he was satisfied. Bear did not think the precautions were much good against dreams, but when he began to think of what they might be good against, he wished it were only the dreams. The first time, Egwene asked anxiously if the Trollocs were back, but Elias only shook his head and urged them on. Baron said nothing. He knew there were no Trollocs close. The wolves scented only grass and trees and small animals. It was not fear of Trollocs that drove Elias, but something else, of which even Elias was not sure. The wolves knew nothing of what it was, but they sensed Elias's urgent wariness, and they began to scout as if danger ran at their heels or waited in ambush over the next rise. The land became long rolling crests, too low to be called hills, rising across their path. A carpet of tough grass, still winter sere and dotted with rank weeds, spread before them, rippled by an east wind that had nothing to cut it for 100 miles. The groves of trees grew more scattered. The sun rose reluctantly, without warmth. Among the squat ridges, Elias followed the contours of the land as much as
All right, everyone. I'm going to call into this live for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by, and everyone keep stopping by. I appreciate all y'all support. Until next time, everyone, y'all stay safe.